My grandson called me at 7 a.m. and whispered into the phone, "Grandpa, whatever you do, do not wear your brown cowboy hat today." I laughed at first, thinking it was a teenage prank, but his voice cracked with a terror I had never heard before. He said, "Please, just trust me. Take a taxi, do not drive your truck, and leave the hat at home." 3 hours later, I was crouching behind a stack of hay bales at the feed store parking lot, watching my entire life being stolen from me by the last people I ever expected. But the most chilling part was seeing who was standing next to my daughter-in-law wearing my missing brown hat. Before I tell you how I brought hell down on my own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to fight for what is yours against your own blood. My name is Jeremiah Freeman, but everyone in this part of Texas just calls me Big J. I am 69 years old, and I spent 40 years breaking my back as a foreman on oil rigs so that my family would never have to know the taste of hunger. When I finally hung up my hard hat, I bought 500 acres of land just outside of town. It was my paradise. It was the legacy I planned to leave to my son Terrence and my grandson Trey. My wife Beatrice passed away 5 years ago, and since then, it has just been me on the farm. Terrence and his wife Courtney live about 20 minutes away in a subdivision that has too much concrete and not enough soul. That Tuesday morning started like any other, with the smell of strong black coffee and the sound of the rooster crowing, but the air felt heavy. It was humid, the kind of Texas heat that sticks to your skin before the sun even fully rises. I was standing in front of the mirror in the hallway adjusting my collar. I had a meeting scheduled at 10 a.m. with Terrence. He had been pestering me for weeks about signing some papers for a government grant to upgrade the irrigation system on the farm. He said it was free money from the state, but I had to sign for it in person before a notary. I did not like handouts, and I did not like signing things I had not read thoroughly, but Terrence insisted. He said Courtney, who used to work in real estate, had set it all up, and we did not want to miss the deadline. I reached for my brown Stetson cowboy hat on the rack. That hat was my crown. I had worn it to my retirement party, and I had worn it to Beatrice's funeral. It was a part of me. But the peg on the rack was empty. I frowned, scratching my gray beard. I could have sworn I hung it there last night after checking the fence line. I was searching under the bench when the phone rang. It was Trey. "Grandpa, are you up?" His voice was a harsh whisper, like he was hiding in a closet. "I am up, Trey. What is wrong?" "Why are you whispering?" "Grandpa, listen to me carefully. Do not wear your brown cowboy hat today." I paused, holding the receiver away from my ear for a second. The voice sounded like he was on the verge of tears. "Trey, what kind of nonsense is this? I cannot find the hat anyway. Did you take it?" "No, Grandpa, I did not take it, but I know where it is. Please listen. Do not drive your Ford F-150 today. Call a taxi or an Uber. Do not let anyone see you driving into town." Trey had always been a good kid. He was 16, quiet and respectful, unlike his mother Courtney, who always looked at my farm like she was calculating its value per square foot. But this request was insane. "Boy, have you lost your mind. I am going to meet your father in 3 hours. I know, Grandpa. That is why you have to listen. Mom and Dad left early. I heard them talking last night. I cannot explain everything now because they track my phone location, but if you drive your truck, they will see you coming. Just trust me. Wear that old blue baseball cap and sneak into town. Please, Grandpa, do it for Grandma B." The line went dead. I stood there in the silent hallway, gripping the phone until my knuckles turned white. He had invoked Beatrice. Trey knew better than to use her name lightly. A cold knot formed in my stomach. It was the same gut instinct that had saved me from blowout fires on the oil rig. Something was wrong. Something was dead wrong. I looked out the window at my Ford F-150 parked in the driveway. It was a beast of a truck, noticeable from a mile away. If I drove it, everyone in town would know Big J was coming. I put the phone down and walked to the back closet. I dug out an old, faded blue baseball cap I used for painting. I put it on and pulled the brim low over my eyes. I looked in the mirror. Without the cowboy hat and with the cap pulled down, I looked like just another old man trying to keep the sun off his face. I did not look like Jeremiah Freeman, the landowner. I called a ride service on my smartphone, which I barely knew how to use. When the car pulled up, a small sedan that smelled like pine air freshener and old cigarettes, I felt ridiculous. I felt like a fugitive in my own county. The driver was a chatty young man who kept asking about the weather, but I stayed silent, staring out the tinted window as the familiar fields of Texas rolled by. My mind was racing. Why would Terrence and Courtney want me to hide? Or rather, why did Trey want me to hide from them? The meeting was supposed to be at the feed store, which had a small public notary office attached to the side. It was a common place for farmers to handle business. "Drop me off at the back entrance behind the loading docks," I told the driver as we approached the store. He looked at me in the rearview mirror, confused. "The front door is open, sir. Just do as I say, son." I handed him a $20 tip to stop his questions. He shrugged and pulled around the back between the dumpsters and the stacks of pallets. I got out and waited for the car to drive away. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I felt foolish, a 69-year-old man sneaking around behind dumpsters, but Trey's voice kept echoing in my head. "Do it for Grandma B." I crept along the wall of the building, staying in the shadows. I could hear the hum of traffic from the main road. I peeked around the corner toward the front parking lot. There it was, Terrence's shiny black SUV, and right next to it was Courtney's white luxury sedan. They were early. It was only 9:45 a.m. I adjusted my baseball cap and moved behind a large display of fencing wire. From here I had a clear view of the entrance to the notary office. Terrence was pacing back and forth, smoking a cigarette. He had quit smoking years ago or so, he told me. He looked nervous, sweating through his dress shirt, even though it wasn't that hot yet. Courtney was standing by her car door, checking her makeup in the side mirror. She looked sharp, predatory, like a hawk scanning for a field mouse. Then the back door of Courtney's car opened. I squinted my eyes. My vision wasn't what it used to be, but I could see clearly enough. A man stepped out. He was an older black man, about my height and build. He was wearing a plaid shirt just like the ones I wore. He was wearing stiff new blue jeans, and on his head sat a brown Stetson cowboy hat. My hand went to my mouth to stifle a gasp. It was my hat. The distinct sweat stain on the band, the slight curve of the brim I had shaped with my own hands over a decade. I knew that hat better than I knew the lines on my own palm. But the man wearing it was not me. Courtney walked over to him and adjusted his collar. She patted his shoulder and said something that made the man nod vigorously. He turned his head and the sunlight hit his face. It was Joe. Slippery Joe. The town, drunk from the neighboring county. A man who would do anything for a bottle of whiskey and $20. He was homeless, usually covered in grime and smelling of cheap liquor. But today he was clean-shaven. He was washed. He was dressed in my style. From a distance or to a stranger who didn't look too closely, he could pass for Jeremiah Freeman. The realization hit me harder than a physical blow. I felt my knees go weak and I had to grab the wire fencing to hold myself up. They were not waiting for me to sign the papers. They had brought their own Jeremiah. Terrence threw his cigarette on the ground and stomped it out violently. He said something to Courtney and she laughed, a cold, sharp sound that carried across the parking lot. She took Joe's arm, linking it with hers like a loving daughter. I watched paralyzed as my son, my own flesh and blood, opened the door to the notary office. He ushered the imposter inside. They were going to sign the papers. They were going to use Joe to forge my signature on documents that I now realized had nothing to do with an irrigation grant. If they were going to these lengths, hiring an imposter, cleaning him up, stealing my clothes, this was not about a grant. This was about everything. The land, the house, the mineral rights. I wanted to run out there. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tear that hat off Joe's head and punch my son in the face. The old oil rig anger flared up in my chest, hot and dangerous. But then I remembered Trey. Please just trust me. If I ran out there now, what would happen? They would claim it was a misunderstanding. They would say Joe was just confused. They would say I was crazy, the angry old man making a scene. Or worse, they might do something violent. If they were desperate enough to commit fraud this elaborate, they were desperate enough to do anything. I needed proof. I needed to know exactly what they were signing. I took a deep, shaky breath and pulled my smartphone out of my pocket. My hands were trembling so bad I almost dropped it. I switched it to video mode. I had never recorded a video on purpose before, usually just accidental clips of the inside of my pocket, but today I had to be perfect. I moved closer, darting from the wire fencing to a stack of feed bags closer to the office window. The blinds were partially open. I could see inside. The notary was a woman I recognized faintly, a friend of Courtney's from her real estate days. She was smiling at Joe. She did not ask for ID, or maybe she had already been paid not to look too closely. She slid a thick stack of documents across the desk. I zoomed in with my phone camera, praying the image would be clear. At the top of the document, in bold black letters, I saw the words, Deed of Trust, Total Property Transfer. The air left my lungs. They were taking the farm. They were taking the 500 acres my father had dreamed of and I had bought with blood and sweat. They were stealing my home. I watched as Slippery Joe picked up the pen. He hesitated, looking at Courtney. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear, and tapped the paper. Joe nodded and scribbled a signature. It wasn't his name he was signing. He was signing Jeremiah Freeman. My son Terrence stood behind him, watching the theft of his father's legacy with a look of pure, terrifying relief on his face. He wasn't sad. He wasn't ashamed. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. I stopped recording. I had seen enough. The bile rose in my throat, burning like acid. I backed away slowly, silently, moving back toward the shadows of the loading dock. I could not let them see me. Not yet. If they knew I was here, the game would be over before I could make my move. And I realized in that moment, standing amidst the smell of horse feed and diesel fumes, that this was war. They thought Jeremiah Freeman was just an old man ready for the pasture. They thought I was stupid. They had forgotten who I was before I was a farmer. They had forgotten that you don't survive 40 years on the rigs by being soft. I slipped out the back exit of the lot and walked toward the main road to call another taxi. As I waited, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Terrence. "Hey, Dad, running a bit late. Meeting pushed to 1 p.m. Stay home, I'll come get you." I stared at the screen. They were buying time. They wanted me to stay home while they finalized the theft so they could come back and probably kick me out with the papers in hand. Or maybe they had a worse plan for when they arrived. I typed back, my fingers flying across the screen. "Okay, son, I'll be here waiting." I got into the taxi that pulled up. The driver asked where to. "Take me to the bank," I said, "and step on it." I wasn't going home to wait. I was going to drain the accounts before the ink on Joe's signature was dry. But as the car pulled away, I realized something else. Courtney and Terrence weren't smart enough to pull this off alone. Slippery Joe didn't just wake up and decide to be an actor. Someone had coached them. Someone had funded this. And I was going to find out who and burn their whole world down. The betrayal of a son cuts deeper than any knife. But as I watched the Texas landscape blur past my window, I didn't feel pain anymore. I felt cold. I felt focused. They wanted my farm. They wanted my life. Well, they were about to find out that Big J Freeman didn't give up anything without a fight. As I sat in the back of that taxi, my mind raced back to the look on Courtney's face as she handed the pen to the imposter. It wasn't just greed, it was desperation. And desperation makes people sloppy. I checked my watch. 10:15 a.m. By noon, I would be a ghost in my own house waiting for them to return. And when they walked through that door thinking they had won, they would find that the hardest part of skinning a bear is catching him first. I crouched lower behind the stacks of alfalfa bales, my knees digging into the loose gravel of the feed store lot. The smell of dry hay and diesel fumes filled my nose, a scent that usually brought me peace, but today it made my stomach turn. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a rage so hot it felt like my blood had turned to lava. I gripped my smartphone tight, my thumb hovering over the record button. I had to get this right. One slip, one noise, and they would see me. If they saw me, the charade would end, and they would find another way to take what was mine, probably a way that involved a pillow over my face in the middle of the night. Through the gaps in the wire fencing, I had a direct line of sight into the notary office window. The blinds were cheap plastic slats, and they were pulled up just enough for me to see the entire sordid play unfolding. My daughter-in-law, Courtney, was putting on the performance of a lifetime. She stood next to Joe, hovering over him like a guardian angel, but I knew she was really the devil on his shoulder. She reached out and adjusted the collar of my plaid shirt, the one Joe was wearing. It was a shirt I wore to church on Sundays. Seeing it on him on the town drunk was a violation I could feel on my skin. Joe looked terrified. He was shifting his weight from foot to foot, his eyes darting around the small office like a trapped animal. He started to reach up to take off the brown cowboy hat, probably out of habit or respect for being indoors. A man does not wear a hat inside a place of business, not in my generation. But Courtney's hand shot out like a viper. She grabbed his wrist gently, but I could see the tension in her knuckles. She leaned in and whispered something in his ear. She forced a smile for the notary, but her eyes were drilling into Joe. She was telling him to keep the hat on. That hat was the disguise. That hat was the only thing making him look like Jeremiah Freeman from a distance. If he took it off, the gig was up. Joe froze. He nodded slowly and let his hand drop. He wiped his nose on the sleeve of my good shirt. I winced. The notary, a woman named Linda, who had processed my truck titles for years, looked up from her computer. She seemed to ask a question, probably asking if he was feeling all right. Courtney answered for him immediately. I could see her mouth moving fast, her hands gesturing. She was spinning a web. She was probably saying that Dad was just having a bad day, that his memory was slipping, that he was tired. She patted Joe on the back a little too hard. It was a warning pat. Behave or else. My son Terrence stood in the corner of the office, his arms crossed over his chest. He wasn't looking at Joe or Courtney. He was staring at the floor. He looked small. He looked like a coward. He knew exactly what was happening. He knew that that man in the chair was an imposter wearing his father's clothes, and he was letting it happen. He was letting his wife orchestrate the theft of his own heritage. Seeing his weakness was worse than seeing Courtney's greed. Greed, I understood. Greed is a common sin, but cowardice from my own blood, that was a wound that would never heal. I adjusted my grip on the phone, making sure the camera was focused. The video was clear. I could see their faces. I could see the tension, but I needed the act. I needed the signature. The notary, Linda, stood up and walked to the filing cabinet. She pulled out a thick folder. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was the deed. That was the land. 500 acres of Texas soil that had been in my family's dreams for 3 generations. She sat back down and opened the folder, spreading the documents out on the desk. She began to read. Even through the glass, I could hear the drone of her voice. She was reading the legal description of my property. The coordinates, the boundaries, the mineral rights. I held my breath. This was it, the moment of truth. Linda pointed to a line at the bottom of the page. She handed Joe a black pen. Joe stared at the pen like it was a foreign object. His hands were trembling. He was a man who spent his days holding a bottle in a brown paper bag, not a pen that decided the fate of millions of dollars in real estate. He looked up at Courtney again. He was hesitating. Maybe there was a shred of conscience left in him, or maybe he was just afraid of getting caught. Courtney leaned over him again. Her posture was predatory. She pointed at the line. She tapped it with her manicured fingernail. Sign, she was saying. Sign it, you old fool. Joe gripped the pen. He leaned forward. I watched as the tip of the pen touched the paper. I felt a phantom pain in my chest, as if he were carving his name into my skin. He scribbled. He didn't write Joe. He didn't write his own name. He wrote Jeremiah Freeman. He forged my name on the deed to my home. I bit down on my lips so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to roar. I wanted to smash through that window and drag them all out into the street. I wanted to shake Linda and ask her how she could be so blind. How could she not see that this man wasn't me? I had known her for 10 years, but people see what they want to see, especially when they are looking at a hat and a shirt they recognize. Or maybe Courtney had paid her off too. In that moment, I didn't trust anyone. Joe lifted the pen. It was done. The notary took the paper. She stamped it. That heavy clunk of the stamp hitting the paper echoed in my mind like a gavel sentencing me to death. It was over. On paper, I was no longer the owner of my own life. My son and his wife owned everything. Terrence finally looked up. He walked over to his desk and shook Joe's hand. He shook the hand of the man who had just helped him rob his father. That handshake sealed his fate. There was no going back for him now. He had crossed the line from ungrateful son to criminal. They stood up. Courtney was beaming. She gathered the papers and shoved them into her designer bag as if they were nothing more than grocery receipts. They headed for the door. I scrambled backward, moving deeper into the shadows of the loading dock. I had to be careful. They were coming out. I kept my phone raised, peering through a gap between 2 large pallets of fertilizer. The door to the office opened, and the 3 of them stepped out into the blinding Texas sun. The heat radiated off the asphalt. Courtney looked around, scanning the parking lot. She was checking for witnesses. She didn't see me crouching in the dirt and grime. She thought she had won. She grabbed Joe by the arm and pulled him roughly toward the side of the building, away from the main entrance toward where the dumpsters were. It was the exact spot where I was hiding just 20 feet away. I stopped breathing. I pressed myself flat against the metal siding of the warehouse, praying my old knees wouldn't pop, praying my phone wouldn't beep. They stopped near the corner. Courtney let go of Joe's arm and wiped her hand on her dress as if she had touched something filthy. Her mask of the loving daughter dropped instantly. Her face twisted into a sneer of pure disgust. "You did good, Joe," she said, her voice low and sharp. She opened her purse and pulled out a thick white envelope. It was bulging. Cash. Untraceable dirty cash. She shoved the envelope into Joe's chest. "Here is the rest of it. $5,000, just like we agreed." Joe grabbed the envelope, his eyes wide. He ripped the corner to peek inside. A grin spread across his face, revealing his missing teeth. He looked like a child on Christmas morning, but the gift was my life's work. "Now listen to me, old man," Courtney hissed, stepping closer to him. "You take that money, and you get out of town. You go to your sister's in Oklahoma, and you stay there. If I see your face in this county again, if I even hear a whisper that you are back, I will call the sheriff myself. I will tell them you stole that money from us. Who do you think they will believe? The respected business owner or the town drunk?" Joe's grin faded. He nodded vigorously, clutching the envelope to his chest. "I won't come back, ma'am. I promise. I am gone." "And the clothes," Courtney added, snapping her fingers. "Burn them. Do not let anyone see you in Jeremiah's clothes. If anyone asks, you found them in a dumpster. Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," Joe stammered. He looked terrified of her. He should be. I was terrified of her, and I was a man who had stared down roughnecks and wildcatters. Terrence stood behind her, looking pale. He lit another cigarette, his hands shaking. "Just go, Joe," he mumbled. "Just get out of here." Joe didn't need to be told twice. He turned and scuttled away toward the back alley, moving fast for an old man, his brown boots kicking up dust. He was still wearing my hat, my brown Stetson. Watching it bob away on the head of a thief broke something inside me. Courtney turned to Terrence. Her face was flushed with adrenaline and victory. "We did it, Terry. We actually did it. The farm is ours. We can sell to the developers by Monday." Terrence took a deep drag of his cigarette. "I feel sick, Court. What if he finds out? What if Dad goes to the courthouse? He won't." Courtney scoffed, adjusting her hair in the reflection of the warehouse window. "By the time he figures it out, the property will already be sold and bulldozed. And even if he tries to fight it, who is going to believe him? He is old Terrence. He is getting senile. We will just say he signed it and forgot. We have the notary seal. We have the legal documents. We won." She reached out and squeezed Terrence's arm. "Think about the money, baby. $3 million from the developers. No more debt. No more worrying. We are free. $3 million. They were selling my 500-acre legacy for $3 million. It was worth at least $5. They were selling it for pennies on the dollar just to get quick cash. They were liquidating my life for a quick payout." Terrence dropped his cigarette and crushed it under his heel. Yeah, you are right. We are free." They walked back toward their cars, their footsteps echoing on the pavement. I waited until I heard the engines start. I waited until the tires crunched on the gravel as they pulled out onto the main road. Only then did I let out the breath I had been holding. I slumped against the pallet, my legs finally giving out. I sat in the dirt, clutching my phone. I had it all. I had the video of the notary office. I had the video of the payoff. I had the confession about selling the land and the threat to Joe. I had enough to send them to prison for a long time. But as I sat there, the anger began to change. It cooled. It hardened into something sharp and heavy like a steel pipe. Sending them to prison wasn't enough. Prison was too easy. They wanted to play games with my life. They wanted to treat me like a senile old fool who could be erased. I stood up, brushing the dust off my knees. I adjusted my blue baseball cap. I wasn't going to the police. Not yet. I had a better idea. Courtney wanted to play the game of who controls reality. She wanted to use my senility against me. Fine. I would give her exactly what she wanted. I would be the confused old man. I would be the ghost in their machine. I walked out to the main road to call a taxi, my mind already working on the next steps. I checked my watch. It was 10:45 a.m. They were probably heading to a fancy lunch to celebrate. They would be drinking champagne, toasting to their brilliance. Let them drink. Let them celebrate. Because when I got home, I was going to set a fire under their lives that they wouldn't even see coming until it burned them to ash. I dialed the number for a taxi. My voice was steady when I gave the address. I wasn't Big J the victim anymore. I was Big J the foreman, and I had a mess to clean up. As I waited for the car, I looked down at the video on my phone one last time. I paused it on the frame where Courtney handed the envelope to Joe. The look on her face was pure evil. I saved the video to the cloud and sent a copy to an old email address I hadn't used in years, just to be safe. "You want my farm." "Courtney," I whispered to the empty road, "you want my legacy. Come and take it." The taxi arrived and I climbed in. "Take me to the bank first," I told the driver again. I had business to attend to. "And then take me home. I have a performance to give." The ride to the bank was a blur of strategy. I knew Terrence. He was weak. He followed Courtney's lead, but he cracked under pressure. Courtney was the dangerous one. She was smart, she was ruthless, and she had no moral compass. To beat her, I had to be smarter. I had to be colder. They thought I was helpless. That was my greatest weapon. They thought they had stripped me of my power by forging a signature. They didn't realize that a piece of paper doesn't make a man. A man is made by his word and his will, and my will was iron. I arrived at the bank and walked in with a purpose. I needed to move money. I needed to secure my assets that they didn't know about. But most importantly, I needed to prepare for the moment I walked back through my front door. Because when I walked back in, I wasn't going to be the angry father confronting his thieves. I was going to be the confused old man they claimed I was. I was going to gaslight them until they questioned their own sanity. The game had changed, and they didn't even know they were playing. I slipped through the back kitchen door like a thief in the house I had built with my own 2 hands. The air inside usually smelled of lemon polish and old oak, but today it smelled of cardboard and dust. Silence hung heavy in the hallway, but it was not the peaceful silence of a nap time. It was the empty, hollow silence of a graveyard. My boots made no sound on the linoleum because I moved with the careful tread of a man hunting a predator. I walked into the living room, and my heart stopped in my chest. My sanctuary had been violated. The furniture was pushed against the walls. The curtains were pulled down, leaving the windows bare and staring like dead eyes. But it was the stack of boxes in the center of the room that made the bile rise in my throat. They were taped shut and marked with thick, black marker. One word was scrawled across the top of the largest box: charity. I walked over to it, my hands trembling, not from fear but from a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I ripped the tape off. The sound tore through the quiet room like a gunshot. I peered inside. It was Beatrice. It was my wife's life packed away like garbage. Her Sunday dresses, the blue silk scarf she wore on our anniversary, her knitting needles, the Bible she read every night before bed. Courtney had packed them up. For 5 years I had kept Beatrice's things exactly where she left them because it felt like she was still with me. Courtney knew that. She knew those things were sacred, and yet the moment she thought I was out of the way, she had shoved them into a box to be thrown out like trash. She was not just stealing my land, she was erasing my existence. She was erasing the memory of the woman who had made this house a home. I wanted to scream. I wanted to take a match to the whole house and burn it down rather than let that woman touch another thing. But I closed my eyes and took a breath. I remembered the oil rig. I remembered the pressure gauges climbing into the red. You do not panic when the pressure builds. You focus. I folded the flaps of the box back down. I pushed it gently back into place. I could not let them know I had seen it. Not yet. I walked over to my old leather recliner in the corner of the room. It was the only piece of furniture they hadn't moved, probably because it was too heavy for Terrence to lift alone. I sat down. The leather creaked softly. I pulled the brim of my baseball cap low. I turned off the lamp on the side table. I sat in the darkness and waited. I became part of the shadows. I let the anger harden into a weapon. They thought they were coming home to celebrate a victory. They were coming home to a war. 30 minutes later, the sound of tires crunching on gravel announced their arrival. I heard car doors slam. I heard laughter. It was loud, raucous laughter, the kind that belongs in a bar, not on a family farm. The front door swung open, and sunlight flooded the entryway, blinding me for a second. Courtney walked in first. She was holding a bottle of expensive champagne. She spun around her heels, clicking on the hardwood floor. "We are rich, Terrence," she squealed. "We are finally free of this dump." Terrence followed her in. He looked pale, but he was smiling a weak, watery smile. He was holding the paperwork. The deed. The theft. He closed the door behind him, shutting out the light. "I cannot believe it was that easy," Courtney said, popping the cork. The foam spilled onto my floor, but she didn't care. That old fool did not even read it. He just signed his life away. Slippery Joe deserves an Oscar. Terrence took a swig straight from the bottle. "I feel kind of bad, Court. He is going to be homeless." "Oh, shut up," Courtney snapped. "He will be fine. We will put him in that state home in a week. He will not even know where he is." I had heard enough. I reached out and clicked the lamp on. The yellow light cut through the dim room. Courtney screamed and dropped the champagne bottle. It shattered, spraying glass and expensive liquor across the room. Terrence jumped back, hitting the wall, his eyes wide with terror. I sat there motionless, my hands resting on the arms of my chair. I looked at them. I looked at the fear on their faces. "Hello, son," I said. My voice was low and steady. "You two seem to be in a festive mood." Terrence started to hyperventilate. "Dad," he choked out. "Dad, you are here." "Of course I am here," I said slowly. "Where else would I be?" Courtney recovered faster than him. She was a viper, and vipers strike when they are cornered. She stepped over the broken glass, her eyes narrowing. She looked at my clothes. I was still wearing the plaid shirt and jeans, but I had taken off the baseball cap. She looked for the brown cowboy hat, but it wasn't there. "What are you doing sitting in the dark?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Why are you trying to scare us?" "I am not trying to scare anyone, Courtney," I replied. "I have been sitting here all morning." My head was pounding. I never left the house. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush a man. I saw the gears turning in Courtney's head. She looked at Terrence, then back at me. She knew. She knew she had just watched a man in my clothes sign those papers. She had paid him. She had sent him away. But if I was sitting here claiming I never left the house, then who signed the papers? The panic in her eyes flickered out, replaced by a cold, calculating darkness. She realized the trap. If she admitted she saw me at the notary, she admitted she knew about the imposter. But if she played along, she could use this. She walked toward me, her heels crunching on the glass. She put on a mask of concern, but it slipped a little at the edges. "Dad, what are you talking about?" she said, her voice pitching up into a fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "We just dropped you off. Do you not remember?" I stared at her. This was the moment. This was the pivot point. I could call her a liar. I could tell her I saw everything. But that would end the game too soon. I needed them to think they were in control. I needed them to think I was the weak link. I blinked slowly, trying to look confused. I rubbed my forehead with a trembling hand. "Dropped me off," I muttered. "No. No, I was here. I was sleeping in the chair." Terrence stepped forward, his hands shaking. "Dad, we were at the feed store. You signed the grant papers. Remember, we just drove you home." I looked at my son. He was sweating. He was terrified that the lie was falling apart. "I do not remember that," I whispered. I looked around the room as if I didn't recognize it. Why are there boxes? Why is it dark? Courtney let out a breath. A smile touched her lips. A cruel, predatory smile. She saw an opening. She saw a way to not only keep the stolen land, but to get rid of me faster. "Oh, Terrence," she said, turning to him, her voice filled with mock pity. "Look at him. He is confused. He does not remember the last 3 hours." She turned back to me and crouched down by my chair, putting a hand on my knee. "Dad, you signed the papers for us this morning. You were so happy. You told us you wanted us to handle everything. You gave us the deed." I pulled away from her touch. "I did," I asked, letting my voice waver. "Yes, you did," she insisted. "But now you are forgetting. This is happening more often, Dad. You forget where you put your hat. You forget conversations. And now you are forgetting entire mornings." She stood up and looked at Terrence, nodding meaningfully. "It is worse than we thought," she said to him, loud enough for me to hear. "His mind is going. He is losing touch with reality." Terrence looked at me, then at the floor. He could not look me in the eye. "Yeah," he mumbled. "Yeah, he must be." I sat back in the chair and let my head drop. I let them see a broken old man. I let them see a victim. "So I am losing my mind," I whispered. "Yes, Dad," Courtney said, and she sounded delighted. "But do not worry. We are going to take care of you. We will make all the decisions from now on so you do not have to be confused anymore." I watched them through my lowered lashes. They thought they had won. They thought they had spun my trap around on me. They thought my claim of being home was proof of my senility, not proof of their crime. They had taken the bait, hook, line, and sinker. "Okay," I said softly. "I am tired. I think I need to rest." "You do that," Courtney said. She grabbed Terrence's arm and pulled him toward the kitchen. "Come on, honey, let's get you a drink. We have a lot of planning to do." They walked away, leaving me in the dark living room. I heard them whispering in the kitchen. I heard Courtney say, "This is perfect. If he cannot remember signing, we can say he is incompetent. We can expedite the nursing home." I sat there in the silence, and a cold smile spread across my face. They thought I was losing my mind. They thought I was defenseless. They didn't know that every word they just said was fuel for the fire I was building. I wasn't confused, I wasn't senile, I was Jeremiah Freeman, and I was about to teach them a lesson they would never forget. I closed my eyes and pictured the brown cowboy hat on Joe's head. I pictured Beatrice's clothes in the box. Enjoy your champagne, I thought, because it is the last victory you will ever taste. Dinner that night was a quiet affair, the kind of quiet that happens before a tornado touches down. Courtney had cooked a pot roast, but the meat was dry and the vegetables were mushy as if she had been too distracted plotting my demise to pay attention to the stove. We sat around the dining table, the three of us, and the air was so thick with tension you could have cut it with a steak knife. Terrence kept his eyes glued to his plate, pushing peas around with his fork like a man condemned. He looked sick. Good. I hoped his guilt was eating him alive from the inside out. I played my part perfectly. I let my hand tremble when I lifted my glass. I stared blankly at the wall for long stretches of time, letting my mouth hang open just a fraction. I was the picture of a man whose mind was slipping away like sand through a sieve. Then came the moment I had been dreading. Courtney cleared her throat and reached into her pocket. She pulled out a small orange prescription bottle with the label ripped off. She shook a single blue pill into her palm. "Here, Dad," she said, her voice dripping with that fake sweetness that made my skin crawl. "Dr. Miller called in a prescription for you. He said these will help with your memory. They are just vitamins, really, but they are very strong. You need to take one with dinner." I looked at the pill in her hand. It was small oval and bright blue. I knew what vitamins look like. I had taken multivitamins for 20 years. They were big horse pills that smelled like chalk. This was small and looked like candy. It looked like something designed to knock a man out. "I do not want it," I mumbled, acting like a stubborn child. "I do not like pills." Courtney's smile tightened at the edges. "You have to take it, Jeremiah. It is for your own good. Do you want to keep forgetting where you are? Do you want to get lost again like you did this morning?" I looked at Terrence, hoping for some spark of decency. "Son," I said softly. "Do I have to?" Terrence finally looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed. "Just take it, Dad," he said, his voice hoarse. "It will help you sleep." Sleep. That was the key word. They wanted me asleep. They wanted me out of the way so they could talk freely, or maybe they just didn't want to look at the father they were betraying. I reached out with a shaking hand and took the pill. It felt heavy in my palm like a bullet. I raised it to my lips. Courtney leaned forward, watching me like a hawk watching a field mouse. She needed to see me swallow it. I popped the pill into my mouth, but I didn't swallow. I tucked it under my tongue, pressing it into the soft tissue of my cheek. I took a big gulp of water and made a show of swallowing hard, my Adam's apple bobbing. "Good job, Dad," Courtney said, leaning back in her chair. "You will feel better in no time." I sat there for another 5 minutes, the bitter taste of the chemical coating seeping into my mouth. I had to get it out. I coughed loudly, covering my mouth with my paper napkin. In one smooth motion, a trick I had learned to hide chewing tobacco from the safety inspectors on the rig, I spit the pill into the napkin and crumpled it up in my hand. "Excuse me," I muttered, standing up slowly. "I need to use the restroom." "Do not be long," Courtney called out. "We have dessert." I walked down the hallway, dragging my feet, pretending to be frail. But the moment I closed and locked the bathroom door, my posture straightened. I moved with purpose. I unfolded the napkin. The blue pill was sitting there, glistening with saliva, a tiny poison seed. I needed to know what they were feeding me. I pulled my smartphone out of my pocket. My hands were steady now. I turned on the flashlight and squinted at the pill. There were tiny numbers imprinted on one side. A24. I opened the browser on my phone. I wasn't a tech wizard, but I knew how to use Google. I typed in the description. Blue oval pill, A24. I hit search and waited the little circle spinning on the screen. When the results popped up, I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a vitamin. It wasn't a memory aid. It was haloperidol, an antipsychotic medication used to treat schizophrenia and acute delirium. The side effects listed on the screen were terrifying: confusion, drowsiness, muscle stiffness. In high doses, it was used as a chemical restraint for violent patients. They were drugging me. They weren't just trying to make me sleep. They were trying to induce the very symptoms they claimed I had. If I took this, I would be confused. I would be stumbling. I would be slurring my words. If they dragged me in front of a judge or a doctor while I was on this stuff, I would look exactly like a senile old man losing his mind. They were manufacturing my incompetence. I looked at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were hard and cold. This wasn't just theft anymore. This was assault. This was a violation of my body and my mind. They wanted to turn Jeremiah Freeman into a vegetable so they could harvest his assets. I felt a surge of nausea. My own son, my Terrence. He was sitting out there eating pot roast while his wife fed his father drugs meant for the insane. I dropped the pill into the toilet bowl. I watched it swirl around in the water blue against the white porcelain. I flushed it. The sound of the rushing water was the only sound in the small room. I washed my hands, scrubbing them hard as if I could wash away the stain of their betrayal. I splashed cold water on my face. I had to go back out there. I had to pretend the drug was working. I had to start acting tired, acting slow. I unlocked the door and stepped back into the hallway. I was about to head back to the dining room when I heard a voice. It was Courtney. She wasn't in the dining room anymore. She was in the kitchen, which shared a thin wall with the hallway. I stopped breathing. I pressed my ear against the wall. "Yes, I know it is late," she was saying, her voice low and hurried. "I am confirming the reservation for Friday morning. Name is Jeremiah Freeman." My heart hammered against my ribs. Friday, that was 2 days away. "Yes, I have the payment ready," she continued. "Look, I do not care about the view. I do not care about the activities. I want the basic package, the absolute bare minimum required by state law." I clenched my fists so hard my fingernails dug into my palms. She was haggling over my life. "Shady Pines, right?" she asked. "Okay, good. And you have the secure unit. He wanders. He gets aggressive. We need him in a locked ward. Shady Pines." I knew the place. It was a dump on the other side of the county. It was the place where people sent their relatives when they had no money and no conscience. It had been cited by the state twice in the last 5 years for neglect. It was a warehouse for the dying, and she was putting me in the locked ward. She was telling them I was aggressive so they would keep me sedated and behind bars. "No, he won't be a problem," she said, laughing that cold, sharp laugh. "We started him on the medication tonight. By Friday, he won't even know his own name. He will go quietly." I stepped back from the wall. The hallway seemed to spin. They had a timeline. Friday morning. I had less than 48 hours before a van showed up to haul me away to a hellhole. She wasn't just discarding me. She was throwing me in the trash. The basic package. That was what I was worth to them. After 40 years of work, after raising her husband, after loving their children, I was a line item in a budget that she wanted to zero out. I realized then that there was no coming back from this. There was no misunderstanding. This was a cold, calculated execution of my life. I walked back toward the dining room, but I didn't go in. I stood in the doorway watching Terrence sitting alone at the table, staring into his drink. He looked like a ghost. I looked at him and I felt the last shred of fatherly love wither and die in my chest. He was letting her do this. He was letting her bargain hunt for my cage. I turned around and went to my bedroom. I didn't need to act tired anymore. I was tired. I was tired of them. I was tired of the lies. But as I sat on the edge of my bed listening to the house settle for the night, a new feeling replaced the exhaustion. It was the same feeling I used to get when a storm was brewing in the Gulf. The air pressure dropped, the birds went quiet. They thought they had me. They thought I was a confused, drugged old man waiting for the slaughter. They had forgotten that I was the storm. I took out my phone and sent a text message to the only person in this world I could still trust. "Trey, come to my room tonight. Do not let them hear you." It was time to stop playing defense. It was time to go on the offensive. If they wanted to send me to Shady Pines, they were going to have to drag me there. And I intended to make sure they lost everything before they even got the chance to try. The door to my bedroom creaked open just a fraction of an inch. A sliver of hallway light cut across the floorboards, stopping right at the toe of my boot. I was sitting in the dark, waiting. I held my breath. If it was Courtney or Terrence, I was ready to play the confused old man again. I was ready to ask where my wife was or why the room was spinning. But a familiar face appeared in the gap. It was Trey. My grandson slipped into the room and closed the door without making a sound. He looked older than 16 tonight. His shoulders were hunched and his eyes were red and swollen. He looked like a man who had seen too much of the world too soon. He didn't say a word at first. He just walked over to where I was sitting on the edge of the bed and wrapped his arms around me. He hugged me hard like he was trying to hold me together, or maybe he was trying to hold himself together. I patted his back. His spine felt bony under his t-shirt. He was a good kid stuck in a house full of vipers. "I am sorry, Grandpa." he whispered, his voice cracking. I am so sorry. I knew about the hat. I knew where it was because I put it in Mom's car yesterday. She told me to. She said you wanted to give it away. I did not know why until I heard them talking last night. I pulled him back so I could look him in the eye. You saved me, Trey. That phone call saved my life. If I had walked into that notary office today wearing that hat, they would have claimed I was there. They would have claimed I signed those papers. You bought me time. Trey wiped his nose with the back of his hand. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking so bad he almost dropped it. You need to hear this, he said. I recorded it 2 nights ago. They were in the kitchen. They thought I was asleep. He tapped the screen and the sound of his mother's voice filled the small room. It was tinny and harsh coming through the speaker, but the words were clear enough to stop my heart. We are out of time, Terrence Courtney's voice hissed on the recording. The investors want their money. That crypto exchange collapsed and took everything. If I do not come up with $200,000 by the end of the month, they are going to come for us. Not the bank. The other guys, the ones who break legs. I listened, my jaw tightening. So that was it. It wasn't just greed. It was a gambling debt. She had played with money she didn't have and lost. Then I heard my son's voice. It sounded weak, pathetic. I know, Court. I know. But selling the farm is going to take time. And what about my job? If they find out I was fired 6 months ago for embezzlement, we are going to jail. I looked up at Trey. He was staring at the floor, ashamed of his own parents. Embezzlement. My son wasn't just unemployed. He was a thief. He had been fired for stealing and hadn't told anyone. He had been pretending to go to work every morning, probably sitting in a park or a bar waiting for the clock to run out while his wife gambled away their future. The recording continued. That is why we have to move fast, Courtney said. We get the old man to sign, or we forge it. It does not matter. We sell the land to that development group in cash. We pay off the loan sharks. We pay back your company before they press charges. And we dump Jeremiah in Shady Pines. It is the only way we survive. The recording ended. The silence in the room was heavy. They are desperate, Grandpa Trey said quietly. That makes them dangerous, right? You are damn right it does, I said. My voice was hard. I wasn't angry anymore. I was past anger. I was in tactical mode. They are cornered animals, Trey, and cornered animals bite. They do not care about me. They do not care about you. They care about saving their own skins. I stood up and walked to my dresser. I reached into the back of the sock drawer and pulled out a small silver USB drive. I had used it to back up my old rig schematics years ago, but it was empty now. I turned to Trey. I need you to do something for me, son, and it is going to be dangerous. Trey looked at me. His eyes were wide but steady. Anything, Grandpa. I need access to your mother's computer, I said. I need to know who she owes. I need to know where the money went, and I need proof of Terrence's embezzlement. If we have that, we can stop them. We can send them to jail before they send me to the graveyard. Trey nodded. Her laptop is in the living room. She is sitting on the couch drinking wine. She is watching TV. Is she facing the computer or the TV? I asked. The TV, Trey said. But the laptop is open on the coffee table right in front of her. I handed him the USB drive. You are going to go out there. You are going to tell her you need to look up something for school, a project, homework, anything. You plug this in. I have a script on there. It will copy her documents and her browser history automatically. It takes 2 minutes. Can you give me 2 minutes? 2 minutes is a long time when you are stealing from a viper, Trey said, swallowing hard. But I can do it. I gripped his shoulder. If she catches you, you tell her you found it on the floor. You play dumb. Do not let her know we are working together. I understand, Trey said. He took the drive and slipped it into his pocket. He took a deep breath, steeling himself. Then he opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. I waited a count of 10, then I followed him, staying in the shadows of the doorway. I needed to be close. If things went south, I needed to be there. I peered around the doorframe. The living room was lit by the flickering blue light of the television. Courtney was sprawled on the sofa, a glass of red wine in one hand, her phone in the other. She looked relaxed, but I knew better. She was a wire pulled tight. Trey walked into the room. He moved casually, but I could see the tension in his neck. Hey, Mom, he said. Courtney jumped a little, sloshing wine in her glass. She glared at him. Jesus, Trey. You scared me. Why are you not in bed? I forgot I have a history paper due tomorrow, Trey lied. His voice was steady. Good boy. My printer is out of ink. Can I email it to myself from your laptop? Courtney sighed, rolling her eyes. Can it not wait until morning? It is due first period, Trey said. Please, Mom. It will take 2 seconds. Fine, Courtney snapped. Make it quick, and do not close my tabs. I am working on something. Working on robbing me, I thought. Trey sat down on the edge of the coffee table. He reached for the laptop. I watched as he slid the USB drive into the side port. His hand was quick. He started typing, pretending to log into his email. I counted the seconds in my head. 1, 2, 3. Courtney took a sip of wine. She wasn't watching him. She was looking at her phone, probably checking crypto prices or texting her loan shark. 30 seconds passed. Trey was just typing nonsense keys, acting busy. The little light on the USB drive was blinking rapidly. It was working. Then Terrence walked into the room. He looked disheveled. He had been crying or drinking or both. He stopped in the doorway staring at Trey. What are you doing? He asked, his voice slur. Just homework, Dad, Trey said without looking up. Terrence frowned. He walked closer. He stood over Trey, swaying slightly. That does not look like homework. Courtney looked up. Leave him alone, Terrence. He is just sending an email. Terrence leaned down, peering at the screen. He squinted. What is that little silver thing? My heart hammered. He had seen the drive. What thing? Trey asked, trying to cover the port with his hand. That thing plugged into the side, Terrence said, reaching out. Let me see. Panic flared in Trey's eyes. He froze. He didn't know what to do. If Terrence pulled that drive out now, they would see the copying program running. They would know. I had to act. I had to create chaos. I looked around the hallway. On a small side table sat a large porcelain vase. It had been Beatrice's favorite, a blue and white antique she had inherited from her mother. It broke my heart to even touch it, but Beatrice would have smashed it herself to save her grandson. I grabbed the vase. I didn't just drop it. I hurled it down the hallway toward the kitchen. The crash was deafening. It sounded like a bomb going off. Shards of porcelain exploded across the floor, clattering against the walls. Courtney screamed and jumped up from the couch, spilling her wine all over the white rug. Terrence spun around, losing his balance and falling onto the sofa. What the hell was that? Courtney shrieked. I stepped out into the light. I let my eyes go wide and wild. I let my mouth hang open. I started shaking my hands, flapping them around like I was fighting off invisible bees. The snakes! I yelled, my voice cracking. The snakes are everywhere. Get them off me. Get them off. I stomped my feet, dancing around the hallway, kicking at nothing. Courtney and Terrence stared at me in horror. They forgot about the laptop. They forgot about Trey. They just saw a crazy old man losing his mind in the middle of the night. Dad, stop it, Terrence yelled, scrambling up. There are no snakes. They are biting me, I screamed, grabbing my own arms. Help me. They are biting me. Courtney ran toward me, her face twisted in fury. Jeremiah, stop this right now. You are going to wake the neighbors. While their backs were turned, I locked eyes with Trey. I gave him a tiny, imperceptible nod. Pull it, I mouthed. Trey yanked the USB drive out of the computer. He shoved it into his pocket. I am done, he said loudly, standing up. Thanks, Mom. Courtney didn't even look at him. She was too busy trying to grab my arms to stop me from flailing. Go to your room, Trey, she yelled over her shoulder. Your grandfather is having an episode. Trey ran past us. He slipped the USB drive into my hand as he brushed by. It was a smooth handoff, perfect and unseen. I clutched the cold metal in my palm. We had it. I let Terrence grab me. I let him drag me back toward my bedroom. I kept muttering about snakes and fire, letting my legs go weak so he had to support my weight. He shoved me onto the bed. He was breathing hard, smelling of stale whiskey. Stay here, he panted. Just stay here, Dad. Do not come out. He slammed the door and I heard the lock click. They had locked me in. Good. That meant they wouldn't come in. I lay in the dark listening to them cleaning up the broken vase in the hallway. I heard Courtney cursing Beatrice's vase, cursing me, cursing her life. I rolled over and pulled my laptop out from under the mattress. I plugged in the USB drive. My hands were steady now. The act was over. I opened the files, and there it was. Bank statements, emails to a man named Razor, notices of overdue payments, and a folder labeled Dad's Farm. I opened the folder. It was full of forged documents, scans of my signature practiced over and over again, emails with the notary. I had them. I had everything. But as I scrolled through the emails, one subject line caught my eye. It was an email from Courtney to a construction company dated 2 days ago. Subject: clearance schedule. I opened it. The text was short and brutal. We will have the property vacated by Friday afternoon. The current resident will be removed. You can bring the bulldozers on Saturday morning. We want the house gone before the town realizes what is happening. They weren't just selling the land. They were bulldozing the house. My house. Beatrice's house. They were going to flatten 40 years of memories into the dirt less than 24 hours after they locked me away. I closed the laptop. A cold calm settled over me. They wanted to play dirty. They wanted to erase me. Well, I was about to show them that you cannot bulldoze a man who has roots made of iron. I sat there in the dark, clutching the drive. Friday was tomorrow. They were coming for me in the morning. I had one night to turn this evidence into a weapon that would not just stop them but destroy them. I picked up my phone and dialed the number for Leonard Banks. It was 2 a.m., but Leo would answer. He always answered for me. "Leo," I whispered when he picked up. "Wake up. We are going to war." The sun had barely risen when I sneaked out of my own house again. I told Terrence I was going for a walk to clear my head. He didn't even look up from his coffee. He just grunted, probably relieved to have the crazy old man out of his hair for an hour. I walked straight past the end of the driveway and kept going until I reached the main road where I flagged down the first bus heading into town. I clutched the silver USB drive in my pocket like it was a grenade. It was. It was a grenade that was going to blow my family apart. I got off at the public library. It was a quiet brick building that smelled of old paper and silence. I hadn't been inside since Trey was in elementary school. I walked up to the front desk. The librarian, a young woman with purple hair, looked up. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "I need a computer," I said, my voice raspy. "One in the back, away from the window." She pointed me to a row of computers in the far corner. I sat down. The chair was hard plastic. I stared at the screen. It was asking for a login. I fumbled for my library card, which I had dug out of my wallet on the bus. I typed in the number, my fingers stiff and clumsy. It took me 3 tries to get the password right. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. I wasn't a tech guy. I knew how to operate a drilling rig, not a computer, but I had to do this. I plugged the USB drive into the tower. A window popped up. Drive E detected. I clicked on the folder labeled Documents. It was a mess of files, recipes, crypto charts, screenshots of shoes she wanted to buy. I scrolled down looking for anything that looked like a smoking gun. Then I saw a folder simply named Project Farm. I clicked it. Inside were emails saved as PDF files. I opened the first one. It was dated 2 weeks ago. The sender was Courtney. The recipient was Linda the notary. "Hey Linda," the email read, "we are ready to move forward. The old man is being difficult, so we are going to use an alternate signer. We will bring him in on Tuesday. Just need you to stamp it and not ask questions. Remember, your cut is $50,000. That should cover your husband's surgery." My stomach dropped. Linda wasn't just a sloppy notary. She was being bribed. She was selling her integrity to pay for her husband's medical bills. It was tragic, but it didn't excuse what she did. She had stamped a lie. She had helped steal my home. I opened the next file. It was a scanned document. A promissory note. I, Courtney Freeman, promised to pay Razor the sum of $200,000 by Friday at noon. Collateral deed to 500 acres at 124 Old Mill Road. She had already pledged my land. She had used my home as collateral for a loan shark before she even owned it. If she didn't pay by Friday noon, which was today, this man Razor would come looking for his money, or my land, or blood. I sat back in the chair, the plastic digging into my spine. This was worse than I thought. They weren't just selling to developers. They were tangled up with criminals. If I didn't stop this, I wouldn't just lose the farm. I might end up with a bullet in my head when the loan sharks came to collect and found out the deed was worthless. I clicked on another folder, bank statements. I hesitated. Did I really want to see this? Did I want to see how deep the rot went? I clicked it. A list of PDFs appeared. Terrence Freeman, Chase checking. I opened the most recent one. My eyes scanned the lines of transactions. Liquor store, online casino, crypto exchange, and then I saw it, a deposit. Transfer from J. Freeman Retirement, $30,000. I frowned. I hadn't transferred $30,000 to Terrence. I checked the date. 2 months ago. I remembered that day. Terrence had come over to help me set up online banking on my iPad because he said it was safer than paper statements. He hadn't been helping me. He had been stealing my login. He had transferred $30,000 of my hard-earned money straight into his account. And where did it go? The very next line showed a debit, CarMax, down payment. He had bought Courtney's new white luxury sedan with my retirement money, the car she drove to the notary office to steal my land. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and angry. My son, my Terrence. He wasn't just weak, he was a thief. He had looked me in the eye, eaten my food, and driven a car bought with my stolen sweat. He was no better than Courtney. In fact, he was worse, because he was my blood. I wiped the tear away. There was no room for sadness now, only action. I copied the files to a new email draft and sent them to Leonard Banks. Then I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He picked up on the second ring. "Big J," he said, his voice booming. "I got your text last night. What in God's name is going on?" "They stole the farm, Leo," I said, my voice flat. "They forged the deed. They bribed the notary. And Terrence has been robbing me blind for months." There was a silence on the line, then the sound of a chair scraping back. "I am looking at the files you just sent," Leo said. "Jesus, Jay. This is a RICO case. This is conspiracy. Fraud. Grand larceny. I know," I said. "What do we do?" Leo took a breath. "Listen to me, Jay. We can go to the police right now. We have enough to arrest them all by lunchtime. But the legal system is slow. They might get bail, they might try to run, or they might try to hurt you before the cops get there. I do not want them to run," I said. "I want them to pay." Leo's voice dropped an octave. "Okay, Big J, I know that tone. You are in foreman mode. So I'm going to ask you a question and I need an honest answer. Do you want to tong them into prison and let the state handle it? Or do you want to get your money back, your land back, and leave them with nothing but the clothes on their backs? Do you want justice, or do you want to break them?" I looked around the library. I saw an old man reading a newspaper. I saw a kid doing homework. Normal people living normal lives. My life would never be normal again. My family was dead to me. All I had left was the land and my dignity. "I want them to live," I said slowly. "I want them to wake up every morning in a cold cell or a gutter and remember the day they tried to cross Jeremiah Freeman. I want them to know that they didn't just lose. I want them to know I took everything." Leo let out a low whistle. "All right then, we do it your way, but we need to catch them in the act. We need them to think they have won until the very last second." "What do you need me to do?" I asked. "Go home," Leo said. "Go home and act like the victim. Let them think the plan is working. Let them bring the nursing home van. Let them think the sale is going through. We will strike when they sign the final contract with the developers. That is when we drop the hammer." "Can you get the deed blocked?" I asked. "I can file an emergency injunction," Leo said, "but it will take 24 hours. You need to buy us 24 hours, Jay. Can you survive in that house with them for one more day?" I thought about the poison pill. I thought about the boxes packed with Beatrice's clothes. I thought about the look on Terrence's face when he lied to me. "I can survive," I said. "But Leo." "Yeah, Jay, if they try anything tonight, if they try to hurt me or Trey, do not say it," Leo cut in. "Just defend yourself. But do not give them a reason to call the cops on you." I hung up the phone. I pulled the USB drive out of the computer. I stared at the little silver stick. It contained the destruction of my son's life. I put it back in my pocket. I stood up. My knees popped. I felt old, but I also felt strong. I walked out of the library and into the bright Texas sun. I had 24 hours. 24 hours to play the role of a lifetime. 24 hours to watch my enemies circle like vultures thinking I was carrion. I caught the bus back home. As I walked up the long driveway, dust kicking up around my boots, I saw Terrence sitting on the porch smoking. He watched me approach. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just watched me with dead eyes. "Where were you?" he asked when I got close. "Just walking, son," I said, letting my voice quaver a little. "I got lost for a bit. The roads all look the same these days." Terrence flicked his cigarette butt into my rose bushes. "Beatrice's rose bushes." "Well, don't wander off," he said. "We have a big day tomorrow." He didn't know how right he was. Tomorrow was going to be the biggest day of his life. The day it all ended. I walked past him into the house. The air was still stale. The boxes were still there. But now I knew what was in them. And I knew what was coming. I went to my room and sat on the bed. I waited. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the floor. The house grew dark. Then I heard Courtney in the kitchen. She was humming. She was cooking. I smelled something savory. Soup. Mushroom soup. My stomach growled, but my instincts screamed. Why was she cooking? She hated cooking. She usually ordered takeout or made Terrence do it. I walked out into the hallway. I peeked into the kitchen. Courtney was standing over the stove, stirring a big pot. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small vial. She poured the contents into the soup. She stirred it in vigorously, the spoon clanking against the metal pot. Then she tasted it, smiled, and put the lid on. I backed away silently. Poison. She wasn't waiting for the nursing home. She wasn't waiting for the state to take me. She wanted me incapacitated tonight. Maybe she wanted me dead. She had poured something into the soup, and she was going to feed it to me. I went back to my room, my heart racing. I needed a plan. I couldn't refuse to eat. That would make them suspicious. If I said I wasn't hungry, she would force me. She would nag me until I took a bite. I needed to turn the tables. I waited until she called out, "Dinner is ready, Dad." I walked into the dining room. The table was set. 3 bowls of steaming mushroom soup. It smelled delicious, rich and earthy. But underneath the garlic and herbs, I detected a faint chemical tang. Courtney was smiling. She pulled out my chair. "Sit down, Dad. I made your favorite." It wasn't my favorite. My favorite was chili. But I smiled back a wobbly old man smile. "Thank you, dear," I said. I sat down. Terrence sat across from me. He looked even worse than before. Pale, sweating. He was staring at his soup like he was afraid of it. Maybe he knew. Courtney sat down at the head of the table. "Dig in," she said. "It is best when it is hot." I picked up my spoon. I looked at the creamy liquid. I looked at Terrence. I looked at Courtney. She was watching me. Her eyes were fixed on my spoon. I lifted it to my lips. My hand trembled, and then I dropped the spoon. It clattered onto the table, splashing soup onto the placemat. "Oops," I said, my voice shaky. "I am so clumsy." Courtney sighed loud and annoyed. "It is okay, Dad. Just be careful." She stood up to get a paper towel. She turned her back. Terrence was looking at her. He wasn't looking at me. This was my chance. I moved with the speed of a man half my age. I reached across the table. I grabbed Terrence's bowl. I slid my bowl over to his spot. I pulled his bowl to mine. It took less than 2 seconds. Courtney turned back around with the paper towel. I was sitting there holding my spoon, looking down at my new safe bowl. Terrence was looking at the table, lost in his own misery. He hadn't seen a thing. "Here," Courtney said, wiping up the spill. "Now eat, before it gets cold." I nodded. I dipped my spoon into the soup. I took a bite. It was good. I watched Terrence. He picked up his spoon. He dipped it into the bowl, my bowl, the poisoned bowl, poisoned. He lifted it to his mouth. "Eat up, son," I said softly. "You look like you need your strength." Terrence swallowed. He took another bite, and another. Courtney watched me eat, smiling her shark smile. She didn't look at Terrence. She was too busy enjoying her victory over the old man. She didn't know she was watching her husband poison himself. I ate my soup. I scraped the bowl clean. "That was delicious, Courtney," I said, wiping my mouth. She beamed. "I am glad you liked it, Dad." Then Terrence dropped his spoon. It hit the bowl with a loud crack. He groaned. He clutched his stomach. Terry, Courtney asked, her voice changing instantly. "What is wrong?" "My stomach." Terrence gasped. It burns." He doubled over, his face turning a terrifying shade of gray. Foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Courtney stood up, her chair falling over backward. "Terrence." She looked at me. Then she looked at his empty bowl. Then she looked at my empty bowl. Her eyes went wide. She realized. She didn't know how, but she knew. Terrence fell out of his chair, hitting the floor with a heavy thud. He started to convulse. Courtney screamed. I sat there watching them. I didn't move. I didn't help. I just watched. "You should call 911. Courtney," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I think Terrence ate something that disagreed with him." She looked at me, and for the first time I saw true fear in her eyes, not fear of getting caught. Fear of me. She scrambled for her phone, dialing with shaking fingers. I leaned back in my chair and folded my hands. The game was over. Now the war began. The smell of mushroom soup usually reminded me of Beatrice, who used to make it with heavy cream and fresh herbs she grew in the garden window box. But tonight, the air in the kitchen did not smell like memories. It smelled like a chemical fire covered up with cheap air freshener. Courtney stood over the stove, stirring a large stainless steel pot with a wooden spoon. Her movements were jerky and frantic, like a bird that had flown into a window. She added pinch after pinch of dried spices, garlic powder, onion powder, cayenne pepper. She was trying to bury the scent of whatever she had poured from that small vial I had seen earlier. I sat at the head of the dining table, my hands resting on the placemat. I kept them still, but my heart was hammering a rhythm against my ribs that felt like a jackhammer on concrete. This was it. The accelerated timeline. They weren't waiting for the nursing home van on Friday morning. They weren't waiting for the state to declare me incompetent. Courtney needed me out of the way tonight. Her debts were due, and patience was a luxury she could no longer afford. "Dinner is ready, Dad," she announced, turning around with a smile that looked like it was painted on with a knife. She carried the tureen to the table and set it down on a trivet. Steam rose from the pot, thick and creamy, but underneath the savory aroma of mushrooms was that faint metallic tang I had noticed before. It was the smell of a pesticide we used to use on the rigs to keep the rats away from the cables. It wasn't enough to kill a man instantly, but it was enough to shut down his nervous system and leave him drooling and helpless. Terrence came into the room. He looked worse than he had all week. His skin was the color of old newspaper, and he was sweating through his shirt even though the air conditioning was humming. He sat down to my right, avoiding my eyes. He stared at the tablecloth, tracing the pattern with a shaking finger. He knew something was happening tonight. He might not have known exactly what was in the soup, but he knew this was the end of the line for his father. Courtney ladled the soup into 3 bowls. She did it with precision. 1 scoop for Terrence, 1 scoop for herself, and then she paused. She stirred the bottom of the pot, scraping the ladle against the metal before serving the 3rd bowl. That was the one. The concentrated dose. The heavy sediment where the poison had settled. She placed that bowl directly in front of me. "There you go, Dad," she said, her voice pitching high and tight. "Eat up. It will help you sleep." She sat down across from me and picked up her spoon, but she didn't eat. She watched me. Her eyes were fixed on my hands, waiting for me to lift the spoon to my lips. She looked like a wolf waiting for a lamb to wander away from the flock. She needed to see me take that first bite. She needed the confirmation that her problem was about to be solved. I looked down at the creamy gray liquid. Small flecks of parsley floated on the surface, innocent camouflage for the malice underneath. I felt a wave of nausea, but I pushed it down. I couldn't falter now. I had to be the old man. I had to be the clumsy, confused geriatric they believed I was. I picked up my spoon. My hand trembling intentionally, I dipped it into the soup. I lifted it halfway to my mouth and then let it drop back into the bowl with a loud clatter that made Terrence jump. My hand slipped, I muttered, staring at the table. I am so clumsy these days. Courtney let out a sharp breath of irritation. "Just be careful, Dad. You are making a mess." "I am thirsty," I said, my voice raspy. "I need some water." Terrence immediately pushed his chair back. "I will get it, Dad. I need a beer anyway." He stood up and walked into the kitchen, his footsteps heavy on the tile. He needed alcohol to numb the guilt. He needed to be out of the room when his father took the poison. Coward. Courtney watched him go, her eyes narrowing. She turned back to me, but I was ready. I reached for the paper napkins in the center of the table, but I knocked the holder over, sending napkins fluttering onto the floor on her side of the table. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Courtney snapped. She bent down to pick them up, disappearing beneath the edge of the table. This was my window. 3 seconds, maybe 4. I moved with the speed that had saved my life a dozen times on the oil field. I didn't think. I acted. I reached out and grabbed Terrence's bowl. I slid my bowl, the one with the heavy sediment, across the smooth wood to his place setting. I pulled his bowl in front of me. The liquid sloshed slightly but didn't spill. By the time Courtney sat back up clutching the napkins, I was sitting exactly as I had been holding my spoon, looking down at my bowl. The switch was perfect. The bowls looked identical, but the contents were worlds apart. She put the napkin holder back on the table and smoothed her hair. "Here," she said, handing me a napkin. "Try not to drop anything else." Terrence walked back in with a glass of water and a bottle of beer. He set the water down in front of me and slumped into his chair. He didn't look at his bowl. He didn't look at me. He just picked up his spoon and stared into the middle distance. "Thank you, son," I said, taking a sip of the water. It was cool and clean. It tasted like life. I dipped my spoon into my new safe bowl. I took a bite. It was mushroom soup. Just soup. I swallowed. Courtney let out a breath she had been holding. Her shoulders relaxed. She thought she had won. She thought the poison was inside me now, working its way through my blood. She picked up her own spoon and started to eat, a satisfied smirk playing on her lips. I watched Terrence, my son, the boy I had taught to ride a bike, the man who had forged my signature and stolen my savings. He lifted his spoon. He took a bite of the poison intended for me. He chewed slowly, mechanically. He swallowed. "Eat up, son," I said, my voice soft but steady. "You look like you need your strength." He nodded absent-mindedly and took another bite. And another. He was hungry, or maybe he just wanted to finish the meal so he could go hide in his room and drink until he forgot what he had allowed to happen. I ate my soup in silence, watching the justice of the universe unfold in real time. It was a terrible thing to watch your own child poison himself, but he had made his choice. He had chosen his wife over his father. He had chosen greed over honor. And now he was eating the fruit of that choice. Courtney was chatting now, her mood elevated. She talked about the weather, about a new dress she wanted to buy, about how we needed to clear out the attic on Saturday. She was already planning her life after Jeremiah Freeman. She didn't look at Terrence. She didn't notice the way his face had gone pale, the way a sheen of cold sweat had broken out on his forehead. I finished my bowl. I wiped my mouth with the napkin. "That was delicious, Courtney," I said. She beamed at me. "I am glad you liked it, Dad. I made it special." Then Terrence dropped his spoon. It hit the ceramic bowl with a sharp crack that silenced the room. He groaned a low guttural sound that came from deep in his chest. He gripped the edge of the table, his knuckles turning white. Terry, Courtney asked, annoyance flickering in her eyes. "What is wrong with you?" "My stomach." Terrence gasped. He doubled over, pressing his fist into his gut. "It burns. It feels like fire." Courtney frowned. "Did you drink too much beer on an empty stomach?" "No," Terrence wheezed. His face was turning a terrifying shade of gray, almost blue around the lips. He looked up at her, his eyes wide and bewildered. "The soup. It tastes like gasoline." Courtney froze. Her fork stopped halfway to her mouth. She looked at him. Then she looked at his empty bowl. Then her eyes darted to my empty bowl. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her eyes went wide with horror. She didn't know how it had happened. She had watched me eat. She had watched him eat. But the symptoms were unmistakable. Terrence fell out of his chair. He hit the floor with a heavy thud that shook the floorboards. He started to convulse his limbs, jerking uncontrollably. White foam gathered at the corners of his mouth. Terrence, Courtney screamed, pushing her chair back so hard it tipped over. She fell to her knees beside him. "Terry, baby, what is happening?" She knew what was happening. She had put the ingredients in the pot. She knew exactly which nerve agents she had mixed into that mushroom broth. I sat there watching them. I didn't move. I didn't get up. I just folded my hands on the table and watched the chaos. "He is having a seizure," I said, my voice calm and detached. "You should call 911, Courtney." She looked up at me. Her face was a mask of pure terror, not terror for her husband, but terror of me. She saw the calmness in my eyes. She saw the lack of confusion. She saw the hard, cold stare of the foreman who used to fire men for less than this. "You," she whispered, "you did this." I did nothing, I said. I ate my dinner. Terrence ate his. Maybe he is allergic to mushrooms, or maybe he is allergic to betrayal. Terrence arched his back, his heels drumming against the floor. He was choking. "Call the ambulance," I commanded, my voice cracking like a whip. "Now." She scrambled for her phone, her fingers slick with sweat. She dialed 911, screaming into the receiver. "My husband is dying. He is poisoned. Send help." She admitted it. She said poisoned. The recording of that call would be another nail in her coffin. I stood up slowly and walked over to where my son lay writhing on the floor. I looked down at him. I felt a pang of sorrow deep in my gut, but it was buried under layers of disappointment. "Help is coming, son," I said to him. although I doubted he could hear me. "You just hold on." Courtney was sobbing now, trying to wipe the foam from his mouth. She looked up at me, her eyes filled with hate and fear. "I will kill you," she hissed. "You old bastard, I will kill you." "You tried," I said, "and look where it got you." Sirens wailed in the distance, getting closer. The flashing lights swept through the front window, painting the walls in chaotic bursts of red and blue. The paramedics burst through the door, a flurry of activity and noise. They pushed Courtney aside and began working on Terrence. They checked his pupils. They checked his pulse. "Possible organophosphate poisoning," one medic shouted. "Get the atropine. We need to intubate." Courtney stood in the corner, shivering. She looked small and defeated. I walked over to her. I moved with the slow, heavy gait of an old man, but when I stopped next to her, I stood tall. I leaned in close to her ear. She flinched, expecting me to strike her, but I didn't touch her. I just whispered, "That soup was delicious, daughter-in-law. It is a shame Terrence had such a big appetite. He always did take what wasn't his." Courtney turned to look at me, her face draining of all color. She opened her mouth to scream to accuse me, but no sound came out. She realized in that moment that she wasn't dealing with a victim. She was dealing with a witness who had just served her husband the fate she had prepared for him. And as the paramedics loaded my son onto the stretcher, I smiled at her. A cold, hard smile. "This is just the appetizer, Courtney," I whispered. "The main course is coming." Friday morning broke with a sky the color of a bruised plum. The air was thick and humid, the kind of weather that makes your joints ache and your temper short. I sat in my armchair facing the front door. My old Louisville Slugger baseball bat rested across my knees. It was scarred and taped at the handle, a relic from the days when I played in the oil field leagues. I hadn't swung it in 20 years, but my grip was still firm. I knew Courtney wasn't done. She couldn't be. Terrence was in the hospital recovering from his own stupidity, but Courtney was still out there desperate and cornered. And a cornered animal is the most dangerous kind. I checked my watch. 8:00 a.m. The nursing home van was supposed to arrive today, but I knew she wouldn't send a legitimate medical transport. Legitimate doctors asked questions. Legitimate nurses checked vitals before dragging a man out of his home. No, she would send something else. At 8:15, a white unmarked van pulled into the driveway. It wasn't a medical vehicle. It was a beat-up cargo van with rusted wheel wells. 2 men got out. They were wearing scrubs, but the fabric looked cheap and ill-fitting, tight across the shoulders and biceps. These weren't nurses. They were bouncers. They were muscle for hire, probably the same kind of lowlifes she owed money to. Courtney pulled up behind them in her white sedan. She didn't get out. She just rolled down her window and pointed at the house. I could see her shouting orders, her face twisted in a snarl. She wasn't playing the grieving daughter-in-law anymore. She was the general ordering a hit. The 2 men marched up the walkway. They didn't carry medical bags. They carried zip ties and a roll of duct tape. They weren't coming to care for me. They were coming to package me up like a piece of meat and dump me in a cell at Shady Pines. I stood up. My knees popped, but I ignored the pain. I moved to the side of the doorframe into the shadows. I wasn't going to open the door for them. They were going to have to earn their entry. They didn't even knock. There was no "Hello, Mr. Freeman." There was just the heavy thud of a boot against the wood. The deadbolt held for the first kick, but the frame splintered on the second. With a crash that shook the pictures on the walls, the door flew open. "Get him?" One of the men grunted. He stepped into my foyer. He was big, at least 6'4", with a neck like a tree stump. He looked around, expecting to see a frail old man cowering in the corner. He didn't see the man who had survived blowout fires and bar fights in the roughest towns in Texas. I stepped out from the shadows. I didn't say a word. I didn't give a warning. I swung the bat. It connected with his ribs with a sickening crunch. The sound was loud and wet. The man folded in half, wheezing the air driven from his lungs. He dropped to his knees, clutching his side. The second man froze in the doorway. He looked at his partner on the floor, then up at me. His eyes went wide. He saw the cold rage in my face. He saw the way I held the bat ready for the next swing. "You want to take me?" I growled, my voice low and dangerous. "Come and get me." The second man roared and charged. He was faster than the first. He lowered his shoulder, aiming to tackle me. I sidestepped. I wasn't as fast as I used to be, but I knew this house better than anyone. I knew exactly where the rug slipped on the polished hardwood floor. I had loosened the rug earlier that morning. As he planted his foot to turn, the rug slid out from under him. He flailed his arms, windmilling in the air before crashing down hard on his back. His head hit the floor with a solid thud. He groaned, trying to roll over, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped forward and brought the bat down hard on his thigh. He screamed. It was a high-pitched sound that echoed through the house. "Stay down," I commanded, raising the bat again. The first man, the one with the broken ribs, was trying to crawl toward the door. He was gasping for air, his face pale. "Help," he wheezed. "He is crazy." "I am not crazy, son," I said, standing over them like a titan. "I am just defending my home. You boys picked the wrong house. You thought you were coming for a sheep. You found a wolf." I looked out the open door. Courtney was sitting in her car, staring at the house. She must have heard the screams. She must have seen her hired muscle failing. She slammed her hand against the steering wheel. Then I heard sirens. My neighbor, Mrs. Gable, must have called them when she saw the men kick in the door. She was a nosy woman, but today I thanked God for her curiosity. Blue and red lights flashed against the morning sun. A sheriff's cruiser skidded to a halt in the driveway, blocking the van. 2 deputies jumped out, guns drawn. "Freeze," one of them shouted. "Drop the weapon." I looked at the bat in my hand. I looked at the 2 men groaning on my floor. I knew how this looked. I slowly lowered the bat and placed it on the floor. I raised my hands. "Do not shoot," I said calmly. "I am the homeowner." Courtney saw her chance. She jumped out of her car and ran toward the deputies, screaming and crying. "Help him!" she shrieked, pointing at me. "He is having a psychotic break. He attacked the nurses. He is trying to kill everyone." The deputies looked from her to me. They saw an old black man standing over 2 men in scrubs. They saw the violence. They didn't see the self-defense. They saw what Courtney wanted them to see. "Turn around." "Sir," the deputy barked, "hands behind your back." I did as I was told. I felt the cold steel of the handcuffs bite into my wrists. They pushed me against the wall. It was humiliating. After a lifetime of obeying the law of building this community, I was being treated like a criminal in my own foyer. Courtney stood behind the deputy, sobbing fake tears into her hands. "I told you he was dangerous," she wailed. "I tried to get him help. These poor men were just trying to take him to the hospital. Look what he did to them." One of the deputies knelt beside the man with the broken ribs. "You okay, buddy?" he asked. "He broke my ribs," the thug groaned. "He is a maniac." The deputy glared at me. "You are in a lot of trouble, Mr. Freeman. Assault with a deadly weapon." I kept my mouth shut. I knew that anything I said right now would be twisted. Courtney was winning. She had turned my defense into my crime. She was going to use this arrest to prove I was violent and incompetent. She would have me committed by tonight. Courtney walked closer, a smirk hidden behind her hands. "I am so sorry, officers," she said. "He has dementia. He does not know what he is doing. Please just let the medical team take him. We have a bed waiting for him at Shady Pines." She was so close to victory, she could taste it. She reached out to touch my arm, acting the concerned daughter-in-law. "It is okay, Dad," she whispered. "We will get you the help you need." But then the front door opened again. "Stop!" a young voice shouted. We all turned. It was Trey. My grandson stood on the porch, his phone held high in the air. He was breathing hard like he had run all the way from the barn. "Do not arrest him," Trey yelled. He was defending himself. "Step back, son," the deputy warned. "This is a crime scene." "It is not a crime scene," Trey said, walking right up to the deputies. "It is a home invasion. And I have proof." Courtney's face went white. Trey put the phone away. She hissed. "Go to your room." "No, Mom." Trey said, his voice shaking but firm. "I am done lying for you." He shoved the phone toward the deputy. "Look at this. I recorded it from the window." The deputy hesitated, then took the phone. He pressed play. I couldn't see the screen, but I could hear the audio clearly. It was the sound of Courtney's voice recorded just 10 minutes ago outside the house. "Listen to me, you idiots," her voice snarled from the speaker. "I do not care if he resists. You go in there and you drag him out. If you have to break his arm, do it. Just get him in the van. Here is $2,000 up front. You get the rest when he is locked in the cell at Shady Pines." The video continued, showing her handing a thick roll of cash to the 2 men in scrubs. It showed them pulling ski masks out of their pockets before putting them away when they saw Mrs. Gable watching. It showed them kicking the door in. The silence on the porch was absolute. The deputy looked up from the phone. He looked at the 2 men on the floor. He looked at Courtney. Then he looked at me. "Uncuff him," he said to his partner. The second deputy unlocked the handcuffs. I rubbed my wrists, feeling the blood flow back. I stood up tall, adjusting my shirt. Courtney backed away, shaking her head. That is out of context, she stammered. I was paying for his medical transport. It was a private service. Medical transport services do not kick down doors, ma'am, the deputy said, his voice cold. And they do not take cash bribes to break arms. He turned to the two thugs on the floor. You two are under arrest for breaking and entering an assault. Then he turned to Courtney. And you, ma'am, you have some explaining to do. Courtney looked at Trey. Her eyes were filled with a mixture of shock and hatred. You little traitor, she spat. How could you? I learned from the best, Trey said quietly. He walked over and stood next to me. He put his hand on my shoulder. Are you okay, Grandpa? He asked. I am fine, son, I said, looking at Courtney. I am better than fine. The deputies began to haul the thugs out to the cruiser. One of them took Courtney by the arm. I am not arresting you yet, ma'am, the deputy said. But you are not staying here. This is Mr. Freeman's house and you are trespassing. But I live here, Courtney screeched. My husband owns this house. Not anymore, I said, stepping forward. I pulled the papers Leo had prepared out of my back pocket. I had kept them on me just in case. This is a restraining order, I said, handing it to the deputy. It was signed by a judge an hour ago. It bars Courtney Freeman and Terrence Freeman from coming within 500 feet of this property or me. Leo worked fast. He had emailed it to me and I had printed it out in the library. The deputy looked at the paper. It looks valid to me, he said. You need to leave, ma'am. Now. Courtney looked at me. She looked at the house. She looked at the land she had tried to steal. She realized she had lost this battle. But her eyes told me the war wasn't over. This is not the end, Jeremiah, she hissed as the deputy escorted her to her car. We have the deed. We own this land. You can kick me out today, but I will be back with the sheriff to evict you tomorrow. I smiled. A cold, hard smile. Bring them, I said. I have something to show them too. She got into her car and peeled out of the driveway, dust flying. The police cruiser followed her, carrying the two thugs. I stood on the porch with Trey. The adrenaline was fading, leaving me tired and aching. My shoulder throbbed where I had swung the bat. You did good, kid, I said to Trey. You saved me again. Trey looked down at his shoes. She is my mom, Grandpa. I hate doing this to her. I know, son, I said, wrapping an arm around him. It is a hard thing to stand up to your blood. But sometimes you have to cut off a limb to save the body. We went inside. The house was a mess. The door was broken. There was blood on the floor, but it was still my house. I picked up the baseball bat and put it back in the closet. I wouldn't need it again. The next fight wasn't going to be physical. It was going to be legal, and I had one more card to play, a card that Courtney didn't even know existed. She thought she had the deed. She thought she owned the land. She was about to find out that Jeremiah Freeman didn't just know how to dig for oil. He knew how to bury landmines. I walked to the kitchen and poured 2 glasses of lemonade. I handed one to Trey. Drink up, I said. We have work to do. We need to find the property markers. What markers? Trey asked. The ones I moved 10 years ago, I said, winking. Courtney was going to bring the sheriff to evict me. She was going to bring the developers to bulldoze my house. But when they looked at the deed she stole and compared it to the land I actually lived on, they were going to find a very big, very expensive surprise. I wasn't living on the land she stole. I was living on the land she forgot to check. Saturday morning arrived with the roar of an engine, but it was not the bulldozers Courtney had promised. It was the heavy thrum of a sheriff's cruiser coming up the gravel drive. Dust billowed behind it, coating the white fence posts I had painted every spring for 30 years. I stood on the porch drinking my coffee black. My bag was packed. It sat by the door. Not because I was leaving, but because I wanted them to think I was beaten. Courtney's white sedan followed the cruiser closely like a shark trailing a fishing boat. She parked and stepped out before the dust had even settled. She was wearing a sharp black suit and sunglasses, looking every inch the grieving land heiress she pretended to be. She held a thick folder in her hand, clutching it like a weapon. Sheriff Miller stepped out of his car. He was a good man, a man I had known since he was a rookie deputy breaking up bar fights on Saturday nights. He took off his hat and wiped sweat from his forehead. He looked at me, and then he looked at the ground. He did not want to be here. "Morning, Jeremiah," he said, his voice heavy. "Morning, Sheriff," I replied, not moving from my spot. Courtney marched up the steps, her heels clicking on the wood. She thrust the folder toward the sheriff. "Do it," she demanded. "Serve him." Sheriff Miller sighed. He opened the folder and pulled out a document stamped with the official seal of the county court. "Jeremiah," he said, looking me in the eye, "I have a court order here. It is an eviction notice based on a transfer of deed filed yesterday afternoon. According to this paperwork, the property at 124 Old Mill Road now belongs to Freeman Development, LLC, managed by Courtney Freeman." I looked at the paper. I saw the signature at the bottom. It was the forgery Slippery Joe had scrawled in the notary office. It looked shaky, but legal enough for a judge who didn't look too closely. "So that is it?" I asked. "I am being kicked off my own land." The sheriff nodded slowly. "The order says immediate vacation of the premises. They claim you are a danger to the property and yourself. I am sorry, Jay. Unless you can prove this signature is fake right here and now, I have to enforce it. You have to leave." "I cannot prove it is fake, not without a forensic expert and a court date," I said. Courtney smirked. She took off her sunglasses, revealing eyes that shone with cold triumph. "You heard him, old man," she said. "Get out. The construction crew is on their way. I want this house empty in an hour." Sheriff Miller looked at her with distaste. "Give him some time, ma'am. He has lived here 40 years. "He has had plenty of time," Courtney snapped. "He has been a burden on us for years. I want him gone. Now." I looked at her. I looked at the sheriff. I didn't argue. I didn't shout. I didn't tell them about the video on my phone or the confession from the nurse. That was for the courtroom. Today was for a different kind of lesson. "All right," I said, putting my coffee cup down on the railing. "The law is the law." Sheriff Miller looked surprised. He expected a fight. He expected me to barricade the door. "You are going voluntarily?" he asked. "I am," I said. "I will get my things." I turned and walked back into the house. I could feel Courtney's eyes boring into my back. She was probably already calculating how much the copper wiring in the walls was worth. I walked into the living room. The box of Beatrice's things was still there where I had left it. I picked it up. It was heavy, but it felt good in my arms. I grabbed the small suitcase I had packed. I walked back out to the porch. Courtney was standing by her car, typing furiously on her phone. Probably texting Terrence to tell him the good news, or maybe texting her loan shark that the money was coming. When she saw me come out, she laughed. "That is it?" she asked. "That is all you are taking?" "It is all I need," I said. She gestured toward the main gate. "Well, go on then. The taxi stand is 3 miles down the road. Start walking." I walked down the steps. My boots crunched on the gravel. I walked past the sheriff, who tipped his hat to me, a silent apology in his eyes. I walked past Courtney, who didn't even move out of my way, forcing me to step into the dirt. I walked toward the gate. But 10 yards down the driveway, I stopped. Courtney watched me. "Keep walking, Jeremiah," she yelled. "Do not stop." I didn't keep walking. Instead, I turned left. I stepped off the gravel driveway and onto the grass. I walked past the old oak tree where I used to push Terrence on a tire swing. I walked toward the back of the property, toward the small wooden bunkhouse I used for storage and sometimes for afternoon naps. Courtney frowned. "Hey," she shouted. "Where do you think you are going?" "The exit is that way." I ignored her. I kept walking, my pace steady. I reached the bunkhouse. It was a simple structure, just one room with a porch and a rocking chair. It had a small kitchenette and a bathroom. It was solid. I had built it myself 10 years ago when Beatrice first got sick so she could watch the sunset without climbing the stairs of the main house. I walked up the steps of the bunkhouse. I put Beatrice's box down on the porch. I took a key from my pocket and unlocked the door. Courtney ran toward me, her heels sinking into the grass. She looked furious. "What are you doing?" she shrieked. "You cannot stay there. You have to leave the property. The eviction notice says the whole property. 124 Old Mill Road. That includes this shack. Get out." Sheriff Miller had followed her, walking slowly, his hand resting on his belt. "Jay," he called out. "She is right. If that building is on the parcel, you have to vacate." I turned around and sat in the rocking chair on the bunkhouse porch. I looked at Courtney. She was red-faced, sweating in the Texas heat, her perfect hair starting to frizz. "I am not on your property," I said calmly. Courtney pulled the deed out of her folder and waved it in the air. "Are you senile, old man? Read the paper. 500 acres, 124 Old Mill Road. I own everything as far as the eye can see." I leaned back in the chair and rocked. The wood creaked a comforting rhythm. "Sheriff," I said, "do me a favor. Look at the legal description on that deed. Look at the coordinates. Sheriff Miller looked at me confused. Then he looked at Courtney. "May I see that, ma'am?" Courtney huffed and shoved the paper at him. "It says the whole farm. He is just trying to stall." Miller put on his reading glasses. He scanned the dense blocks of text, the survey coordinates, the plot numbers. He read in silence for a moment, his brow furrowing. Then he stopped. He looked up at the main house. Then he looked at the bunkhouse where I was sitting. Then he looked back at the paper. He started to smile. It was a small smile at first, but it grew until he was trying hard to suppress a laugh. What Courtney demanded. "What is it?" Miller handed the paper back to her. "Ma'am, did you read this survey before you before you acquired this land?" "Of course I did," she lied. "It is the farm." "Well," Sheriff Miller drawled, pointing at a line of fence posts about 20 yards away from where I sat, "it seems you own Parcel A. Parcel A consists of the agricultural grazing land, the main house, and the barn. That is about 490 acres. He pointed to where I was sitting. "But Mr. Freeman here is currently sitting on Parcel B." Courtney stared at him. "Parcel B? What are you talking about?" "There is no Parcel B. It is one farm." "No, ma'am," Miller said. "According to these coordinates, which match the county records I have in my cruiser, this 10-acre plot, including this bunkhouse, the well, and the access road to the south, was subdivided 5 years ago. It has a separate deed." He looked at me. "And I am guessing you didn't sign the deed for Parcel B, did you, Jay?" "No, sir," I said. "I did not. Parcel B is held in an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary is my grandson Trey, and as his legal guardian, I have a right to reside here." Courtney went pale. She looked at the paper again, her hands shaking so hard she ripped the corner. "Subdivided," she whispered. I stood up. "That is right, Courtney. 5 years ago when Beatrice died, I split the land. I wanted to make sure Trey always had a place that was his no matter what happened with you and Terrence. I put the main farm in my name, but I put the homestead remnant in a trust." I pointed to the invisible line between the oak tree and the rose bushes. "That line right there," I said. "That is the property line. You own the big house, you own the dirt, you own the cows, but you do not own me, and you do not own this roof." Courtney screamed. It was a primal sound of pure frustration. She threw the folder on the ground. "You tricked me," she yelled. You knew, and you let me take the wrong deed." "I didn't let you do anything," I said coldly. "You stole it. You sent a drunk to sign a paper you didn't bother to read properly because you were too busy counting your money. You were so greedy you didn't check the survey. You just saw 500 acres and thought you had it all." She stomped her foot like a child. "It does not matter. I still own the main house. I still own the land. I can still sell it to the developers." I nodded. "You sure can? You can sell it. But there is one small problem." "What problem?" she spat. I pointed to the ground near the main house. "The water," I said. "What about the water?" she asked. "When I subdivided the land, I said I kept the water rights. The well is on Parcel B, the irrigation pump is on Parcel B, and the contract with the county water supply is in the name of the trust." I smiled. "If you sell that land to developers, they are going to need water to build, and they are going to need water for the houses, but the only source of water for miles is right here under my feet, and I am not selling a drop." Courtney stared at me. Her mouth opened and closed. She realized what this meant. Land without water in Texas is worthless. It is just dust. No developer would touch it. She had stolen a dessert. Sheriff Miller cleared his throat. "Well, Mrs. Freeman, it looks like Mr. Freeman is on his own property. I cannot evict him. In fact, if you are standing on this side of that fence post, you are trespassing." Courtney looked at the sheriff. She looked at me. She looked at the big, empty house she had stolen. "You old bastard," she hissed. "You planned this." "I didn't plan for you to betray me, Courtney," I said. "I just planned for the day someone might try." She turned around and marched back to her car, grabbing her phone. She was probably calling the developers, trying to salvage the deal. But I knew it was over. Once they saw the water survey, they would pull out faster than a rattlesnake striking. She slammed her car door and peeled out, leaving ruts in the grass of Parcel A, her grass. Sheriff Miller watched her go. He picked up the folder she had thrown on the ground and dusted it off. "You played a dangerous game, Jay," he said, handing me the papers. "I had to play the hand I was dealt." "Sheriff," I said, taking the folder. He nodded. "You know she is not going to stop. She owes money, Jay. Bad money. If she cannot sell the land, she is going to get desperate." "I know," I said, looking at the cloud of dust settling on the road. "I am counting on it." I watched him drive away. I was alone on my 10 acres. I had lost the big house. I had lost the barn. But I had kept the heart of the farm, and I had trapped Courtney in a financial prison of her own making. But Miller was right. She was desperate. She owed $200,000 by noon today. It was now 11:00 a.m. The developers would pull out within the hour once I called them about the water rights. That meant Courtney had 1 hour before her world collapsed. She would come back, or she would send someone. I went inside the bunkhouse. I opened the small closet. Inside was a steel gun safe. I spun the dial. I took out my shotgun. I checked the shells. I sat back down in the rocking chair with the gun across my lap. "Let them come," I whispered to the empty fields. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't playing dead. I was waiting. And while I waited, I picked up my phone. It was time for the final nail in the coffin. I dialed the number for the church secretary. "Hello, Martha," I said when she answered. "I need a favor. I need to speak at the service tomorrow. Yes, it is important. It is about the new charity fund I want to start." I wasn't going to start a charity. I was going to start a fire. Tomorrow is Sunday, I thought. The Lord's Day. A day for truth. Courtney would be there. She had to keep up appearances. She would be sitting in the front pew wearing her best hat, pretending to be a saint. And I was going to walk in there and show the whole town exactly what kind of devil she really was. Sunday morning in Texas is usually a time for peace and reflection, but as I walked through the double doors of the Grace Community Church, the air felt heavy with the promise of a storm. I was wearing my best suit, the charcoal one Beatrice had picked out for me years ago. It hung a little loose on my frame now, but my shoulders were squared and my head was high. I stood in the back of the sanctuary, hidden by the shadows of the vestibule, watching the congregation file in. The church was full. Fans hummed overhead, cutting through the heat, and the choir was warming up with a soft hymn that sounded like forgiveness. But there was no forgiveness in my heart today, only justice. I scanned the rows of pews until I found them. Sitting in the third row, right in the center, were Courtney and Terrence. They looked like the picture of a grieving, pious family. Courtney was wearing a modest white dress and a wide-brimmed hat that shaded her face. She held a handkerchief in her hand, dabbing at dry eyes. Terrence sat next to her, his head bowed, his posture slumped like a man carrying a weight he could not set down. They were putting on a show. They were working the room. I watched as Mrs. Higgins, the head of the church charity committee, leaned over the pew to whisper to Courtney. Courtney grabbed Mrs. Higgins' hand, clutching it like a lifeline. I could not hear the words from back here, but I knew exactly what she was saying. She was spinning the tale of the sick father-in-law, the overwhelming medical bills, the desperate need for community support. She wasn't just there to pray. She was there to beg. She needed money to pay off Razor the loan shark, and she was using the goodwill of these people to get it. She was probably setting up a donation fund for my care right there in the house of God. It made my stomach turn. The audacity of it was breathtaking. She had tried to kill me 2 days ago. She had tried to steal my land yesterday. And today, she was sitting in the front pew asking for money to take care of me. It was a level of evil that I had never encountered, even in the roughest dive bars on the oil coast. Terrence looked up, and for a second, his eyes scanned the room. He looked terrified. He was looking for the exit, or maybe he was looking for the loan sharks. He didn't see me. I was just another shadow in the back. The service began. The choir sang. The pastor, Reverend Thomas, took the pulpit. He was a good man, a man who believed in redemption, but he didn't know he was harboring wolves in his flock. He spoke about charity, about the duty of the community to support those in need. Courtney nodded vigorously at every word, wiping a fake tear from her cheek. She was setting the stage perfectly. Then came the announcements. Reverend Thomas cleared his throat. "We have a special guest today," he said, his voice booming through the speakers. "Brother Jeremiah Freeman has asked to say a few words about a new charitable initiative he is starting. Brother Jeremiah, please come forward." The air in the room changed. I stepped out of the shadows. My boots clicked loudly on the hardwood floor of the center aisle. Click, click, click. A slow, steady rhythm like the ticking of a clock. Heads turned. People whispered, "Look at his big J. He looks fine. I thought he was sick." Courtney froze. Her back went rigid. She didn't turn around immediately. She was terrified of what she would see. Terrence turned his head slowly, and when he saw me walking toward the altar, his face went gray. He looked like he was about to vomit right there in the pew. I kept walking. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes fixed on the cross hanging behind the pulpit. I walked past the rows of friends, neighbors, and people I had known for 40 years. I walked past the people Courtney was trying to swindle. When I reached the third row, I paused for just a fraction of a second. I looked down at Courtney. She looked up at me from under the brim of her hat. Her eyes were wide with panic. She opened her mouth to say something, maybe to scream that I was crazy, that I shouldn't be there, but the look in my eyes silenced her. It was the look of a judge delivering a death sentence. I walked up the steps to the pulpit. Reverend Thomas shook my hand warmly. "The floor is yours, Jay," he said, stepping aside. I stood behind the heavy wooden podium. I gripped the sides with my hands. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw confusion. I saw curiosity. And right in the center, I saw fear. "Thank you, Reverend," I said, my voice deep and steady, amplified by the microphone. "I am here today to talk about truth, because the truth will set you free, but first it is going to make you very angry." I reached into my pocket and pulled out my smartphone. I also pulled out an adapter cord I had bought at the electronics store yesterday. I plugged the phone into the HDMI port on the podium, which connected to the two massive projector screens on either side of the altar. These screens were usually used for hymn lyrics or Bible verses. Today they were going to show a different kind of scripture. The screens flickered to life, showing the home screen of my phone. A murmur went through the crowd. This was unusual. This wasn't how testimonials usually went. Courtney stood up abruptly. Her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "Dad," she said, her voice high and trembling. "Dad, you are not well. We should go. You are confused." She turned to the congregation, spreading her hands. "I am so sorry, everyone. My father-in-law has dementia. He does not know what he is doing. We need to get him to the car." She started to move toward the aisle, trying to cut off my escape, trying to signal Terrence to grab me. "Sit down, Courtney," I boomed into the microphone. The command echoed off the rafters. It was the voice of the foreman. It was a voice that did not tolerate disobedience. Courtney stopped. The sheer force of the sound froze her in place. "I am not confused," I said, looking directly at her, "and I am not going anywhere until everyone sees what I have to show them." Terrence tried to stand up, his legs shaking. "Dad, please, don't." I ignored him. I tapped the screen on my phone. I opened the video file. The massive screens above my head lit up with a high-definition video. It was shaky at first, recorded through the wire fence of the feed store, but the image was clear. It showed the notary office window. It showed Courtney standing over a man. It showed the man clearly. It was Slippery Joe, and he was wearing my brown cowboy hat. A gasp went through the room. Everyone knew Joe, and everyone knew that hat. The video played on. It showed Joe signing the papers. It showed Courtney smiling. It showed Terrence shaking Joe's hand. Then the scene cut. I had edited the video to jump to the parking lot encounter. The audio kicked in loud and clear over the church speakers. "You take that money and you get out of town." Courtney's voice snarled from the screens, amplified to a deafening volume. "If I see your face in this county again, I will call the sheriff myself." She was handing Joe the thick envelope of cash. The image was crisp. You could see the greed on her face. You could see the contempt. The church was dead silent, not a cough, not a rustle of fabric, just the sound of Courtney's voice exposing her own crime. Courtney was standing in the aisle, her face pale as a sheet. She looked around, wild-eyed, looking for an escape, looking for an ally. But the faces looking back at her were not friendly anymore. They were shocked. They were horrified. I let the video play to the end, where she told Terrence they were free. Then I tapped the screen again. I opened an audio file. This one was from the night before the hiking trip. The recording from Trey's phone. We get the old man to sign, or we forge it. Courtney's voice filled the sanctuary again. We sell the land to that development group in cash, and we dump Jeremiah in Shady Pines. It is the only way we survive. Then came the kicker. The part that made the mothers in the room clutch their children and the men clench their fists. "Laoja chet tiet sao chua chet di cho ran no," she hissed in the recording. "Why won't that old bastard just die and leave us alone?" I paused the recording. The silence was broken by a single gasp from Mrs. Higgins. She stood up, her face red with indignation. She looked at Courtney, the woman whose hand she had just been holding. She looked at her like she was looking at a viper. "You wanted us to donate money," Mrs. Higgins said, her voice trembling with rage. "You told us he was sick. You told us you were drowning in medical bills, and you were trying to kill him." Courtney shook her head frantically. No, that is fake. He edited it. He is crazy. It is AI. It is not real." She looked at Terrence. "Do something," she screamed. "Tell them." Terrence had his head in his hands. He was sobbing quietly. He couldn't even look up. He was broken. I leaned into the microphone. "It is real," I said. "And there is more. This woman, my son's wife, tried to poison me 2 nights ago. She hired thugs to break into my house yesterday. And she forged my signature to steal the farm my father built." I pointed a finger at her. A finger that had pointed out drilling spots and safety hazards for 40 years. "She is not a victim," I thundered. "She is a predator. And she came into this holy house to prey on you." The reaction was immediate. It wasn't a riot, but it was a wall of social rejection so solid you could feel it. The people in the pew next to Courtney stood up and moved away, leaving a wide, empty circle around her and Terrence. They were isolated. They were on an island of shame in the middle of the sanctuary. Courtney looked around. She saw the judgment. She saw the disgust. She realized her mask had been ripped off and crushed underfoot. She tried to run. She turned and sprinted toward the side door, her heels clacking on the floor, but the aisle was blocked. The women of the church choir, formidable women in robes, stood in her path. They didn't touch her. They just stood there, a solid wall of righteous indignation. They crossed their arms. They stared her down. Courtney stopped. She spun around looking for another way out. There was no way out. Terrence slid off the pew and fell to his knees in the aisle. He crawled a few steps toward the pulpit. "Dad," he wailed, his voice echoing in the silent church. "Dad, I am sorry. She made me do it." I looked down at him from the height of the pulpit. I looked at the son I had raised, the son I had protected. "You are a grown man, Terrence," I said, my voice cold and devoid of pity. "No one makes a man betray his father. You did that all on your own." I unplugged my phone. The screens went dark, but the images were burned into everyone's minds. I walked down the steps of the pulpit. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I walked past Terrence, who was still blubbering on the floor. I didn't stop. I walked past Courtney, who was pressed against a pillar, shaking uncontrollably. I stopped in front of her. I looked her in the eye. "You wanted the land, Courtney," I said softly so only she could hear. "You wanted the legacy. Well, you got the attention. I hope it was worth it." I walked out the double doors of the church into the bright Sunday sunlight. I took a deep breath of fresh air. It tasted sweet. Behind me, I could hear the chaos erupting in the sanctuary. I could hear Mrs. Higgins yelling. I could hear the pastor calling for order. But I didn't look back. I had lit the fire. Now I was going to let it burn. I walked to the curb where Leonard Banks was waiting in his car. He had been listening to the service on the radio broadcast. He rolled down the window and grinned. "That was biblical Big J," he said. "It is not over yet," I said, getting into the passenger seat. "No," Leo agreed. "The FBI is waiting at her office. We are going to greet them on Monday morning." I looked back at the church one last time. I had exposed the rot. Now it was time to cut it out completely. "Drive," I said. "We have a farm to save." Monday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a blade dropping. The sky was a hard steel gray, matching the fleet of unmarked SUVs idling quietly down the street from Courtney's real estate office. I sat in the passenger seat of Leonard Banks's Cadillac, watching the front door of Freeman Realty through tinted windows. I held a cup of coffee in my hand, but I did not drink it. My thirst today was for something else entirely. Courtney had gone into the office early. She was trying to salvage what was left of her crumbling empire. I knew she was in there frantically shredding documents, deleting emails, and trying to transfer whatever funds she had left to offshore accounts that Leonard had already flagged. She thought she had time. She thought that because it was Monday, she had a few hours before the banks opened or the courts processed the injunctions. She thought she was smarter than the system. She was wrong. At 9:00 a.m. sharp, the doors of the SUVs opened in unison. 12 agents stepped out. They wore navy blue windbreakers with yellow letters on the back. FBI. Alongside them were local deputies and a forensic accountant carrying a hard case. They moved with a synchronized efficiency that was terrifying to behold if you were on the wrong side of it. I had seen roughnecks move like that when a rig was about to blow, but this was different. This was the machinery of justice grinding into gear. They marched up the steps to the glass double doors. Courtney had locked them, probably thinking a deadbolt could stop a federal warrant. The lead agent didn't even hesitate. He signaled to a man with a battering ram. One swing and the glass shattered, raining down like diamonds. They swarmed inside. I watched through the window as the receptionists screamed and ducked under their desks, but the agents ignored them. They headed straight for the glass-walled office in the back. Courtney's office. I could see her inside. She jumped up from her desk, her phone pressed to her ear. She looked like a trapped animal. She grabbed a stack of papers and ran toward the shredder in the corner. But she never made it. 2 agents kicked open her office door. One of them grabbed her arm, twisting it behind her back before she could feed a single sheet of paper into the machine. The other swept the documents off the desk and into an evidence bag. They pulled her out of the office and into the main lobby. She was kicking and screaming, her high heels skidding on the polished floor. It was a scene of utter chaos, and for the first time in months, I felt my shoulders relax. The weight of her threats, the shadow of her greed, it was all being dragged out into the harsh light of day. Leonard put the car in gear, and we rolled slowly past the front of the building just as they brought her out. Her hands were cuffed behind her back. Her hair, usually so perfect, was a mess hanging in her face. Her makeup was smeared. She looked wild. When she saw me sitting in the car, her eyes went wide. She stopped fighting. She just stared. I rolled down the window. I didn't say a word. I just tipped the brim of my brown cowboy hat at her. The hat she had tried to steal. The hat she had put on a drunk to rob me. The lead agent read her rights, his voice carrying over the morning traffic. Courtney Freeman, you are under arrest for wire fraud, forgery, grand larceny, and conspiracy to commit murder. Conspiracy to commit murder. The charge hung in the air, heavy and absolute. It wasn't just about the money anymore. It was about the poison. It was about the thugs she hired. It was about the cliffs. She looked at me one last time, and I saw the light go out in her eyes. She knew it was over. She knew there was no talking her way out of this. No manipulation, no fake tears, no lies could save her from the federal government. They shoved her into the back of one of the SUVs. As the door slammed shut, I felt a chapter of my life close with it. The woman who had tried to erase me was now just a number in the system. Leonard looked at me. 1 down, he said, his voice grim. 1 to go. Drive, I said. We headed toward the subdivision where Terrence lived. It was a 20-minute drive, a drive I had made hundreds of times to visit my grandchildren, to fix their fence, to bring them fresh vegetables. But this time I was coming to watch the destruction of the house I had helped subsidize. We pulled up to the curb. Terrence's car was in the driveway, trunk open. He was trying to run. He was throwing suitcases into the back, and a panic clothes spilling out onto the pavement. He looked pathetic. He wasn't the mastermind. He was just the weak link that had broken under pressure. A sheriff's cruiser blocked the driveway. 2 deputies stepped out, guns holstered but hands ready. Terrence froze. He dropped a suitcase. He looked at the deputies, then he looked at the street and saw me. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just collapsed. He fell to his knees on the concrete driveway, his head in his hands. He started to sob. It was a loud, ugly sound. The sound of a man who realizes he has thrown away everything that matters for absolutely nothing. The deputies approached him cautiously. "Stand up, Mr. Freeman," one of them ordered. Terrence scrambled up, but not to run. He ran toward my car. The deputies grabbed him, but he lunged forward, trying to get to my window. "Dad," he wailed. "Dad, tell them. Tell them it was her. It was all her idea. She made me do it. I was scared, Dad. I didn't want to hurt you." I looked at him through the glass. My son. My flesh and blood. The boy I had taught to fish. The man I had walked down the aisle. He was blaming his wife. He was throwing the mother of his children to the wolves to save his own skin. It was the ultimate act of cowardice. Even in the end, he couldn't take responsibility. He couldn't stand up like a man. I rolled down the window just an inch. "She didn't make you steal my retirement money, Terrence," I said, my voice cold as the grave. "She didn't make you forge my signature, and she didn't make you watch me eat poisoned soup. You did that. You watched your father lift a spoon of poison to his lips, and you said nothing. I didn't think you would eat it," he blubbered, snot running down his face. I don't know what I thought. You thought I would die," I said. "You thought you would be rich. and now you are going to be nothing." The deputies pulled him away. They spun him around and clicked the handcuffs onto his wrists. The sound was final. Click, click. I watched them put him in the back of the cruiser. He pressed his face against the window, mouthing the word "sorry" over and over again. I didn't feel anger anymore. I didn't feel hate. I just felt a vast, empty, hollow space where my love for him used to be. It was like looking at a stranger who had broken into my life and stolen 25 years of memories. Leonard put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay, Jay?" "I am fine." I lied. I wasn't fine. A father is never fine when he watches his son go to prison. But I was right. And sometimes being right is the only comfort you get. "Let's go," I said, turning my eyes away from the police car. "I have a farm to run, and I have a grandson to raise." We drove away, leaving the sirens and the shame behind us. The subdivision faded in the rearview mirror, a monument to false promises and hollow dreams. I didn't look back. I looked forward to the open fields, to the cattle, to the hard, honest work that waited for me. The legal battle would be long. There would be trials. There would be testimony. I would have to stand in a courtroom and point a finger at my own son. But the hard part was over. The betrayal had been exposed. The poison had been drawn out. Now all that was left was to sweep up the ashes and start planting again, because that is what farmers do. That is what men do. We survive the storm and we rebuild. And this time I was building something that no one could ever steal from me again. Courtney made bail 3 days later. I do not know who she called or what lies she told to get the bond money, but she walked out of the county lockup on a Wednesday afternoon. She looked rough. Her hair was unwashed, and she wore the same clothes she had been arrested in, but her eyes were frantic. She did not go home to her children. She did not call her husband. She went straight to the offices of the Texas Land Development Group. I was sitting in Leonard Banks' car across the street watching her. We knew she would go there. Leonard had sources everywhere, including the bail bondsman she had used. She was desperate. She knew the federal case was building against her, but she also knew she had one piece of paper that she thought was still valid. The deed to Parcel A, the grazing land, the land without water. She thought she could still trick the developers into buying it for quick cash so she could flee the country before the trial. She walked into the building, clutching her briefcase like a shield. She had set up an emergency meeting claiming she was ready to sign the final sale agreement immediately for a reduced price. She was trying to sell my land for pennies on the dollar just to buy a plane ticket. We waited 10 minutes. Then Leonard opened his car door. "It is time, Big J," he said, adjusting his tie. "Let us go finish this." We walked into the conference room just as Courtney was uncapping her pen. The developers were there, 3 men in expensive suits looking impatient. They had a check on the table, a cashier's check for $2 million. It was less than half of what the land was worth, but to Courtney it was freedom. She looked up as we entered and the pen fell from her hand. "Get out," she screamed, standing up. "You cannot be here. This is a private meeting. I own this land, Jeremiah. The deed is in my name." The lead developer looked at Leonard. "Who is this?" he asked. "I am Leonard Banks, attorney for Mr. Jeremiah Freeman Leonard," said his voice calm and authoritative. "And I am here to inform you that the woman standing before you is attempting to sell you stolen property using a forged instrument." Courtney laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. "He is lying. I have the notary seal. I have the signature. It is legal." Leonard walked to the table and placed a thin file folder on top of the deed she was about to sign. "We took the liberty of running a forensic analysis on the signature you filed with the county," Leonard said. "We compared it to the known handwriting of Mr. Jeremiah Freeman. It is not a match. But interestingly, it is a perfect match for the handwriting of one Joseph Miller, also known as Slippery Joe, who is currently in police custody and has confessed to impersonating Mr. Freeman in exchange for $5,000 cash." Courtney went pale. She grabbed the table to steady herself. "That is not all," Leonard continued. "We also recovered DNA from the pen used to sign the deed which you foolishly threw into the dumpster behind the feed store. The DNA matches Joseph Miller." He looked at the developers. "Gentlemen, the deed this woman holds is void. It is a piece of trash. If you give her that check, you are not buying land. You are financing a fugitive's escape and becoming accessories to fraud." The lead developer snatched the check off the table so fast it blurred. He looked at Courtney with pure venom. "You told us the title was clean," he growled. "You told us the old man was senile and you had power of attorney. I do own it, Courtney stammered, backing away toward the wall. It was a gift. He gave it to me. Get out, the developer shouted, pointing at the door. Get out before I call the police. Courtney grabbed her briefcase and ran. She burst out of the conference room and into the lobby. I followed her slowly. I wanted to see it. I wanted to see the moment she realized there was nowhere left to run. She pushed through the revolving doors and stumbled onto the sidewalk. She was looking for a taxi, looking for an Uber, looking for any way out. But there was a black sedan parked at the curb. 2 men were leaning against it. They were not police. They were not FBI. They wore leather jackets, and they looked like they carved stone for a living. One of them stepped forward. It was the man from the emails, Razor. Courtney froze. She looked left. She looked right. There was nowhere to go. Ms. Freeman Razor said, his voice smooth and terrifying. We have been looking for you. You missed your payment on Friday. I have the money, Courtney lied, backing up until she hit the glass of the office building. I just need a few more days. The deal is going through. We know the deal is dead, Courtney Razor said, stepping closer. We have sources, too. You have nothing. No land, no husband, no money, please, Courtney begged, tears streaming down her face. I can get it. I have jewelry. You have a debt, Razor interrupted. And we are here to collect. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. He just opened the back door of his car. Get in, he said. We need to discuss a payment plan. Courtney looked at me standing in the doorway of the building. She looked at me with eyes that begged for help. She wanted me to call the police. She wanted me to save her from the wolves she had invited into our lives. I looked at her. I adjusted my hat, and I turned my back. She had made her choice. She had signed her name next to the devil's, and now the bill was due. I heard the car door slam. I heard the tires screech as they drove away. I didn't know what they would do to her, and I didn't care. The federal agents would find her eventually if there was anything left to find. But for now, she was in a prison of her own making. I walked back to Leonard's car. The air smelled of rain and justice. It is done, Leonard said. Not yet, I said, looking toward the county jail. I have one more loose end to tie up. The phone call came 2 days later. I was sitting on my porch watching the sun go down over the fields that were finally safe. The phone rang and the caller ID said, County Correctional Facility. I accepted the charges. Dad Terrence's voice was small, broken. It sounded like the voice of the little boy who used to scrape his knees climbing trees. But that little boy was gone. Hello, Terrence, I said. Dad, you have to help me, he sobbed. It is terrible in here. I am scared. The lawyer says I am looking at 10 years. 10 years, Dad. I will be an old man when I get out. You should have thought of that before you stole my retirement money, I said, my voice steady. I know I messed up, he cried. I know, but I learned my lesson. Please, Dad, put up the farm for bail. Just get me out until the trial. I will work. I will pay you back. I swear. I closed my eyes. I remembered teaching him to drive the tractor. I remembered his high school graduation. I remembered the pride I felt when he got married. All of those memories were now tainted, poisoned by his greed. You learned nothing, Terrence, I said. You are still asking for shortcuts. You are still asking me to pay for your mistakes. Dad, please, he begged. I am your son. No, I said. My son would never have watched his father eat poison. My son would never have let a stranger wear my hat. My son died the day you decided money was more important than blood. There was silence on the line, just the heavy breathing of a man who realized he was truly alone. The prison will teach you what I failed to teach you, I said. It will teach you that actions have consequences. It will teach you to be a man because you have no one else to hide behind anymore. Dad. Wait. I hung up the phone. I didn't slam it down. I just ended the call. It was a quiet click that severed the last tie to the man who had tried to destroy me. I sat there for a long time listening to the crickets. I felt a deep ache in my chest, the grief of a father mourning a living child. But beneath the grief, there was peace. The cancer had been cut out. The wound could finally start to heal. The screen door creaked open behind me. Trey walked out carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. He sat down in the rocking chair next to me. He looked tired, but his eyes were clear. He wasn't a scared kid anymore. He had grown up fast in the fires of this war. Was that him, Trey asked? Yes, I said, taking the tea. Is he coming home? No, son, I said. He is not coming home. Not for a long time. Trey nodded. He took a sip of his tea and looked out at the land. The sun was painting the sky in streaks of purple and gold. The cattle were lowing in the distance. What happens now, Grandpa? He asked. Now we build, I said. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a folded document. Leonard had brought it over that morning. It was a petition for legal guardianship. Since both parents were incarcerated and unfit, the court had granted me full custody of Trey and his younger sister, who was currently staying with my sister Harriet. I handed the paper to Trey. You are the man of the house now, son, I said. I am putting the farm in a trust. It goes to you when you turn 21. But until then, you and I are going to run this place together. We are going to fix the fences, we are going to tend the herd, and we are going to do it the right way. Trey looked at the paper. Tears welled up in his eyes. I won't let you down, Grandpa, he whispered. I know you won't, I said. You have your grandmother's heart. I stood up and walked to the railing. I looked out at the 500 acres that were safe again. I looked at the spot where the bunkhouse stood, the place where I had made my stand. I reached up and took the brown cowboy hat off the peg on the wall. The police had recovered it from Slippery Joe's bag when they arrested him. It was a little battered and it smelled faintly of cheap cologne, but it was mine. I put it on. It settled onto my head perfectly, a familiar weight that felt like a crown. I turned to Trey. Get your boots on, son, I said. We have work to do. Trey smiled. He stood up and went inside to get his boots. I stayed on the porch for a moment longer. I touched the brim of my hat. You see that, Beatrice? I whispered to the wind. I held the line. I was old. I was tired. I had scars that would never fade. But as I walked down the steps to start my chores, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was Jeremiah Freeman. I was a father who had lost a son, but I was a grandfather who had saved a legacy. And that was enough. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the first stars appeared in the vast Texas sky. I walked into the field, my hat pulled low, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. I had won the war. And now I had peace. This story teaches us a brutal but necessary truth. Sharing blood does not guarantee loyalty. Jeremiah's victory proves that dignity has no expiration date and that kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. When greed corrupts the people we love, we must find the courage to cut the rod out, even if it breaks our hearts. True legacy isn't just about the land or money you leave behind. It is about standing your ground against betrayal and protecting the future for those who actually deserve it. Sometimes the hardest war you'll ever fight is the one inside your own home. If you believe Jeremiah did the right thing by choosing justice over blood, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of retribution. Let me know in the comments. Could you have sent your own son to prison to save your legacy?